Welcome, everyone. This is your friend, the DN What If, here with another exciting fanfiction. Today, we're diving into the story of what if Deku survived the UA massacre? If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more fanfiction content just like this. Now, let's get started with the fanfic. Midoriya Izuku fell to his knees in a sea of blood and gore. Viscera covered his hands as he held the head of one of his best friends, Uraraka Achiko. He stared into her dead eyes with numb horror. He didn't move for a long time. He just sat, surrounded by the dead bodies of his 19 friends and classmates. He didn't know how long it had been when he felt a gentle hand on his shoulder. Midoriya shakily looked up. He was met by the face of Endeavor, who was oddly kind-looking. He himself had tears in his eyes. Midoriya's eyes were dry. He just stared at him silently. Those eyes haunted Endeavor for years to come. He would see them in his dreams and nightmares alike. "Let's get you some medical care, kid," he said hoarsely. Midoriya, not in his right mind, looked at him in confusion. But he looked down at Uraraka's severed head. "I have to wait for them to wake up," Midoriya said in a soft voice. "Not all there. Mirio, Best Jeanist, Gang Orca, and an assortment of less injured heroes walked up when they saw Endeavor standing next to Midoriya. They did not see the 19 bodies until they got closer. When they did, they all gagged. Mirio actually did throw up. They walked up and saw Midoriya, who was holding the severed head of his friend, gore and viscera slipping between his fingers. "They are going to wake up, right?" Midoriya asked in a broken voice. That is what the heroes heard when they got to them. Midoriya was looking up at Endeavor with horrified eyes that were somehow terribly empty. "You can only sleep so long, right?" Everyone cringed. Some started crying. A few more people threw up. None had expected to see such a violent slaughter. 19 children killed in brutal ways. One child left to watch it all happen. Endeavor closed his eyes and a single tear ran down the side of his face. "I'm sorry. They are going to be sleeping for a long time," Endeavor whispered in a coarse voice. They all saw the moment he broke. His eyes snapped wide and whirlwind of black tendrils lashed out. He floated a bit off the ground and curled up, dropping the bloody head of his friend. Actual smoke started pouring from his eyes and mouth. For one frigid second, everything was silent. Then the most agonized scream rang out. It is said to have been heard for miles. Even civilians heard it to some extent. Those who were recording caught it on camera. For a long time, no one would know whose scream it was. Just that it was horrifying. It was known as the embodied scream of death by all who heard it. Midoriya screamed for a long time, his black WHPs writhing around. They did not attack anyone though. Midoriya contorted in agony as tears and smoke leaked out of his eyes. He went from curled up to arching his back. His screams went on until he could no longer scream and he passed out. Everything stopped in a nanosecond. Midoriya fell to the ground with a soft thump. After the event dubbed the UA Massacre, everything went to shit. People started rioting against heroes. Hundreds of heroes retired. Many were killed. And all of 1A but one kid and half of 1B had died in the battle. There was only 11 students left in the first-year hero course. Though it might as well have been 10, because Midoriya wasn't, right? And to be honest, no one expected him to be. For the first month he recovered from his terrible injuries in the hospital. He was in a coma for a week and a half of that. After that month he went back to UA, but he was a ghost of his former self. No one could get him to speak. No one could get him to train. He hardly ate. He hardly drank. And for hours he would lock himself up in his room. He was practically dead at this point. Aizawa and the other remaining teachers tried to help. Even though they were all devastated by the loss of Midnight, especially Aizawa and Present Mike. But nothing could be done. Eri was the best help though. Midoriya seemed just the slightest bit more alive around her. Midoriya didn't even have the same reaction with his mother or All Might anymore. Eri was devastated too, and it seemed that being around Midoriya, no matter how dead, made her feel better too. That is, until they found Midoriya on the edge of a rooftop. Aizawa only just caught him on time. No one was surprised. Midoriya was still in therapy, but he refused to speak, so it did nothing. 3 attempts later, and Midoriya was still not doing well. In fact, he might even be doing worse. And then Shinso came into the picture. Aizawa added Shinso to his class, now only consisting of Midoriya and Shinso. Midoriya hardly trained, but he and Shinso would sit in amicable silence. And this was enough for the both of them. But then Midoriya started talking to Shinso. This made them all ecstatic. Midoriya's voice was always soft and sad, like the whisper of a ghost. It made sense he was being called the ghost of 1A now. Shinso and Midoriya got along well. They were bunked next to each other and often just slept in each other's rooms anyway. They were doing wonders on each other. After the first time Midoriya smiled, although very small, they decided to just make them a shared dorm room. And this made things better. Shinso had been adopted by Present Mike and Aizawa. And so had Eri. So Eri knew Shinso well and viewed both him and Midoriya as her big brothers. They would often be found doing things together. Midoriya softly talking in low murmurs while the others made up for his quietness with louder small talk. Midoriya started training again. But then another blow came. As Inko Midoriya was walking to the store, she was attacked by a villain who killed on the spot. Midoriya was silent again. Almost just as bad as before. And then All Might was caught off guard and shot in the head. Midoriya lost both his mother and mentor in the span of 6 days. They found him on the rooftop every single day of the next week. No matter how much they watched him, he always tried again and again. They ended up having to lock him in the common room and keep an eye on him all the time. It took another month until he started talking again and got to the point he was at before. He kept training with Shinso, and he was a force to be reckoned with. Apparently, he could now hear the users of his quirk, which Midoriya had told Aizawa and Mike about after All Might passed. And he had 5 whole quirks. His first one, Danger Sense, Smoke, Float, and Black Whip. There was more, but he had yet to access them. Months flew by. And Midoriya got better and better. He was talking to his therapist. He was speaking to people outside of Shinso, Eri, the Big 3, and the staff. He had just a bit more life about him. He wasn't better yet, not at all. But he was making great progress, much faster than expected. Shinso and Midoriya started dating. Present Mike and Aizawa had basically adopted him too at this point, and they both became parental figures to Midoriya. But then the Hero Commission came and ruined everything. They forced Midoriya to become a full hero at the very end of his first year. No matter how much UA and Midoriya protested, the commission was final. They told them that Midoriya would be locked up if he didn't comply. He complied. And so Midoriya took up the mantle of a hero at the age of 16. He and Shinso got legally emancipated to make things a bit easier on them. The process was expedited by the commission. The next year was Midoriya was off doing hero work way more than he should have, but the commission ran a cruel regimen. Luckily Midoriya had help. Endeavor had had a complete change of heart and helped Midoriya along. The other heroes were always willing to lend a helping hand, especially the remaining ones who had seen him break that awful day. Things weren't ideal, but they weren't terrible. Midoriya only attempted suicide 22 times that whole year. And those were normally clumped together during a major relapse. Midoriya and Shinso both turned 17 and got married. Both were legal adults, so it got settled. They had a small but happy wedding at UA. Midoriya smiled the brightest they had ever seen in a long time. Shinso and Midoriya might have been young, but they were perfect for each other. 6 months passed, and things were starting to look better. With the help of some heroes from other countries, things started to get sorted out. The public wasn't rioting as much as before, at least. More hero students graduated, and things started to go back to normal. But the League and their army had been oddly silent. It put everyone on edge. And with good reason, it seemed. Because on that 6-month mark Shigaraki and his army attacked. One last battle was fought. Thousands died on both sides. Midoriya killed Shigaraki. And it was over. They had won. But at what cost? Half of the UA staff died, including 13, Ectoplasm, Snipe, and Presumate. Vlad was paralyzed from the waist down. Aizawa fell into a deep coma after losing his remaining leg, an arm, and his other eye. The doctors said that there was almost no chance he would ever awaken. Recovery Girl died after being attacked by a remaining villain while treating someone who was killed in the end as well. Endeavor died in the hospital, surrounded by his remaining family. But not before he accidentally killed Tuya first. Hawks and Miruko died holding hands, looking up into the fading sky. Friends up to the bitter end. Mirio was killed by Toga pretending to be Amajiki. Amajiki killed himself right after he found Mirio's body. Nijire was so devastated that she died of stress and grief. The remaining of Class 1B died. The wild PP cats all perished. Even Pixie Bob, who no longer worked on the field. Koda was left all alone. And Shinso, he was rendered mute and lost both of his legs. He would never be a hero. Midoriya broke for a second time. But this time he broke, but resolved himself to keep going. He took care of Shinso, who was depressed. He adopted Eri and Koda both. And he helped the Todoroki family with their grieving. It took a whole year for Japan to go back to some sort of normal. The hero rankings started again. And Midoriya Izuku was placed as the #1 hero. But at what cost? Too much. There was many times Midoriya tried to retire. But the commission threatened his family. So he kept plowing on. The public hated him for the most part. He was supposed to be known as Deku, the I can do it hero. Now they called him Deku, the cursed hero. And he really was cursed from the looks of it. Anyone who wore the little merch he had was often found dead or was attacked. His merch soon became something no one would touch or buy unless you really hated someone. But still, Midoriya kept going. He turned 23 when it happened. Shinso got a bad disease and with his already weak immune system, he got deathly sick. Midoriya, Eri, and Koda all visited him in the hospital for weeks. They would sign and speak to one another. But Shinso started to get weaker and weaker. The doctors told him he only had weeks to live. Midoriya was already broken. This smashed what was left to pieces. When it was clear Shinso had hardly any time left, Midoriya planned. He got his and Shinsu's wedding rings as well as Aizawa's and present mix. He placed them around a necklace and wore it. He sorted everything out, leaving Koda and Eri to Fuyumi and Natsuo. He settled all his finances. On Shinsu's last day of life, Midoriya went to his bedside. Shinso gave him a knowing, sad look. He knew exactly what was going to happen. The last thing Shinso signed was, "I will see you soon, my love." And he died. Midoriya said not a word as he went out of the hospital with Eri and Koda. He took the next week to have a quick funeral and get a gravestone planted. He made sure it was next to an empty plot. Then he left Eri and Koda to the living Todorokis and went to the Hero Commission Tower in his hero suit. He replaced all the money in his wallet with pictures of him and his family. Of him and his classmates. Pictures of a long-lost, but much better time. He went to the top of the skyscraper unnoticed. Then he took out a gun and took off his shoes. He tipped backwards of the edge without hesitation. The gunshot to his head midway was enough to end him. This time, there was no one to save Midoriya Izuku. And then he woke up. Chapter 2. Goodbye. Midoriya opened his eyes. Then he was hit with a wave of pure confusion. The dead normally do not open their eyes. Midoriya sat up and looked around. He was in his old room? But that wasn't possible. His old apartment had been destroyed long ago. Not to mention most of his stuff had ended up in the dorms or his house. Midoriya suddenly realized that there was not an ache in his body. He looked down at his hands. No canes. None. They were not gnarled or bent anymore despite the scars still lining them. They were just normal. And smaller. Midoriya got up and tumbled to the floor. His legs were much shorter than they were supposed to be. He got back up again and started wobbling to the bathroom. He looked in the mirror and blanched. What the hell? Midoriya whispered to himself. He was 13 again. Or his body was at least. He was still wearing his hero costume somehow. His necklace with the 4 rings on it was still hanging around his neck. His wallet was still in his back pocket. Midoriya peeked back into the room. On his bed was a shining gun. Midoriya exhaled in a deep breath and only just stopped himself from having a panic attack. Then he went back to the bathroom and stripped. He still had some of his scars. The spiral ones on his hands and arms. A slash across his cheek and nose that he got during a fight. And other random ones all over his body from the more recent years. Midoriya felt a slight pain in his forehead, right where he had shot himself. He lifted his bangs. A starburst scar the size of a bullet was on his forehead. Midoriya took another deep, shaking breath. What happened? What year was it? Did he go back in time? He decided that this was no time to panic. He went back into his room and got some fitting clothes on. Sure enough, they were the same ones he dully recalled having owned. He folded his oversized hero costume and tucked it under his mattress. The wallet and gun went deep into one of his drawers. And the ring stayed around his neck, hidden in his shirt. The time was 7 a.m. His mom would be waking him up soon. A knock on the door. Midoriya held his breath and opened the door. His mother looked up at him with wide eyes. It made sense. He did look different from what he had before. Inko took a fearful step back. Who are you? Where is my son? She yelled. Midoriya cringed a bit. It's me, Mom, just not the same. Midoriya said softly. His voice was younger, but it held a world-weary tone to it, and it was so soft-spoken. Midoriya had not spoken louder than that in years. He only ever yelled at villains or the commission, and even that was rare. Inko stopped in her tracks. Prove that why you're really Izuku? She demanded. Midoriya smiled sadly at her. Against the doorframe to keep himself from collapsing. When I was 3, we came up with hero names for me. They all had something to do with All Might. Mighty Man, All Kid, Mighty Boy, and more. I would always get so excited. Midoriya let out a wistful chuckle. Those were the good days. Oh, and then there was that time I nearly burned the house down making cookies. You didn't let me in the kitchen alone for a whole year after that. I was 5 at the time, so it didn't matter. Though I was still indignant. Inko's eyes widened. She looked at her son with a new light. She stumbled forward and gently cupped his face. Oh Izuku, what happened? She whispered in horror. Midoriya let out a bitter laugh and actually did collapse this time. Inko guided him down. A lot, Mom, a whole lot. Midoriya choked. Inko reached to her child and gave him a gentle hug. Midoriya and Inko. Mother and son. They embraced for a long time, Midoriya sobbing his eyes out. Wailing in emotional agony. Inko silently cried with him. It took a while, but Midoriya eventually stopped crying. Inko guided him to the couch and they both collapsed on it, still in each other's arms. They sat there for a long time, not caring about work or school. Finally, both were calm. Baby? Inko inquired softly, what happened? Midoriya told her everything in a soft voice. From meeting All Might to shooting himself in the head. The more Inko heard, the tighter she held her son. She closed her eyes and realized just how blessed she was. That there was another chance to do it all. That this future could be fixed. Inko opened her eyes and despite all the turmoil in her gave her son a wry look. So, you got married. And adopted 2 kids. Inko grinned mischievously. When am I going to meet this Shinso boy? Midoriya blinked at her. Then he blushed a bit and chuckled. Not yet. But I am going to have him replace the purple pervert. He would fare much better than Mineta. Inko smiled sadly. So, you are going to try and fix it? Inko sighed, but smiled proudly at her son. You were always so selfless. I know I cannot stop you despite how my heart hurts for you. But I can and will do my best to support you. I love you, Izuku. Midoriya gave her a grateful smile and they hugged again. Eventually Inko had to get up and call the school and her work. It was late but better than not at all. She lied, saying that her son had a mental breakdown and she was busy helping him. She was highly respected at her work, so they got her off easy and wished them both well. The school was less kind, but agreed to pardon him. Once that was done, she made a very late breakfast. Midoriya just breathed. He breathed and thought. He thought of how to deal with this. Of what he needed to do. What his plans were. Soon enough he had the bare bones of a plan. And just in time for breakfast. They both ate on the couch and watched the news. Oh, I remember that. It's kind of odd not seeing news on Mount Lady and Kamui Woods every other day. They survived the war and became pretty popular. The only reason one of them wasn't in number 1 was because everyone collectively hated me so much the new ranking system put me as number 1. They started off pretty cocky and attention-beckoning. But the war sorted them out. Midoriya hummed as news came up. He kept commenting on future events that made Inko feel a little weird. I think Mirio will be number 1 this time around. If everything works out and he doesn't die. Midoriya commented, I'm not going to be number 1. I may even just drop heroics once I fix things. If not, I'm going underground. We'll burn that bridge when we get there. News about Endeavor came on. Midoriya's face went deadpan. I forgot that he's still a flaming pile of shit right now. Midoriya deadpanned. Language child. Inko gasped playfully. Hey, I'm 23. I've had alcohol before. You can't language me. Midoriya joked. Inko faked a scandalized look, placing a hand over his heart. My son is such a delinquent. Whatever shall I do? Inko dramatized. Midoriya snickered. It's okay, Mom, I hate alcohol anyways. It tastes vile. Midoriya reassured her. Inko Zero actually did look a little relieved. They sat in silence for a while. In the silence, Midoriya realized how cold he was. He frowned. Mom? Do I feel cold to you? Midoriya asked. Inko gave him a surprised and slightly guilty look. Yes. I just didn't want to tell you and make you feel bad. Inko admitted. It must be a side effect of whatever sent me back here. Midoriya deducted. He went to the bathroom, his mother in too, and got a thermometer. He swiped it across his forehead. Then he looked at it. I'm the same temperature as a dead person. Midoriya said casually. Inko herself blanched. No wonder you're cold. She gasped, let me get you something. She ran off and grabbed a thick blanket. She wrapped it around his shoulders. Midoriya took it gratefully. They went to the dining room and sat down at the table. What are we going to tell people? Midoriya asked her. These scars aren't exactly subtle. And the second someone touches me, they'll see how cold I am. Not to mention my change in demeanor. The two thought for a while. Then Inko perked up. We could say you got hit by a quirk. She exclaimed, then her face dropped a bit. But what quirk would that be? It could be a memory and experience transfer. Or a subtle future quirk. Or an alter change quirk. Midoriya listed off. I think a mix of the three would work. Inko brainstormed, a quirk that permanently transfers some of the experiences and emotions of your future self. This includes major scars, personality traits, and some smaller memories. And the main side effect of its use is that it makes someone cold. That's perfect. Midoriya grinned. Inko grinned right back at him. But then she got serious. Now, tell me your plans. She asked of him. Midoriya nodded and started to tell her. He would first become a vigilante. He's quirkless at the time, so he could use loopholes so he would be safe from the law for the most part if he were to be captured. He would start by tracking Toga and Dabi down and making them vigilantes instead of villains. Both of them weren't villains until later on. He would have them help UA and possibly infiltrate the League. He would also help save Eri early, so that Overhaul would never have a chance to complete the bullets. That way Eri would be a little less traumatized, Mirio would never lose his quirk, and Night Eye wouldn't die. He would spend as much time possible training to hold one for all before he would have trained with All Might. That way he was ready for the quirk early and could practice to the point where he could handle higher percentages and the quirks. At some point he'll meet up with All Might and save Bakugo. Then gain his quirk again. After that he would continue using his vigilante persona to take care of some other things. Sadly, Koda's parents were already dead. But he decided that he could at least find him and talk to him. He had been planning on being a hero back in Midoriya's old time. Maybe he could convince him again. Once he got into Yuhosu, he would take it from there. Inko approved of his plans and they spent the rest of the day coming up with his vigilante persona. When night fell, they went to bed with a plan in mind. It would be at least a month until the preparations for his vigilante costume and identity were finished. So, he had to wait to start on that. But if there was one thing Midoriya had learned in the past, was that good things come to those who wait. Sometimes it takes forever, but it will come eventually. He started his training again, using what he remembered of All Might's plan to bulk up his sad 13-year-old body. Ends up some of his strength and stamina had translated over too, but not half as much as he needed. He started practicing his martial arts and weapons training that he had learned over the years. Now he just needed to make them muscle memory again. He took off 3 more days of school before he had to go back. At least he was allowed to wear a coat. It was the cold early spring at the very start of his 2nd year of middle school. But over his gakurin he wore a fluffy tan coat lined with faux fur. Midoriya was asked to come in a little late so they could explain his situation to the class. Midoriya was not excited for this year. It was his worst year by far. The teachers had hated him with a passion. The students even more so. He was always beaten up, spat on, made fun of, and just bullied all around. He still had some unresolved trauma from that time. But this time Midoriya wasn't going to let them push him around. They would never know that he was once the #1 hero with one of the most powerful quirks in existence at his beck and call. Not to mention 8 supportive ghosts, whom he missed and couldn't wait to be reunited with. But he had to be patient. In front of the door to his homeroom class he took a deep breath. He could do this. He survived a war while on the front lines. He raised 2 children for years. There was a picture of his family in his coat pocket. He had a husband. He was powerful. And he was going to do this. The door opened for him and he walked in, keeping his chin and mouth tucked cozily into his warm jacket. Eventually he would get used to the cold, but the doctor they went to had told him to keep warm for at least a few months so his body could get used to it. Oh, that trip had been fruitful as well. It seemed that another side effect of whatever happened to him was that his heart stopped beating for the most part. It only beat a few times a minute, which was apparently the same amount of times a person in a coma or on the brink of death would have. So, he was basically dead. And it was a little more apparent with his paling skin. The eyes of everyone in the room followed him. They could only partially see his eyes through his hood and collar. The teacher had already explained everything to the class apparently, because he said nothing but point to his seat. Midoriya nodded and sat down, getting his supplies out. Midoriya, you are allowed to wear the coat due to your complications. But you sadly must take the hood off, his teacher said with fake regret. Midoriya rolled his eyes and huffed. It was keeping him warm this way, but he would just have to deal. He slipped the hoodie off and poked his head out of the collar. Everyone stared at him. Oh, it was likely because of his large scar and leaner frame. He had a less babyish face now. Or it might have been his pale skin, eye bags, and dead eyes that replaced the once bright, glowing look he had to him. Homeroom started and their teacher decided to leave them to do something else, putting the class representative in charge. Immediately everyone descended on him like sharks to blood. Oh my god! Is that really Deku? He looks so different. He looks like a corpse man. Spooky, that scar is crazy. Why is he so pale? People exclaimed from their seats. Midoriya ignored them and started writing in his notebook. He was writing in code about his new vigilante persona. Then they decided to walk up and surround his desk. Of course. What kind of quirk were you hit by? Someone asked him. This was one of his nicer classmates who never stuck around to watch and never bothered or hurt him. He remembered that much at least. This time Midoriya did look up and locked eyes with the boy. His eyes were dead and hard, but they softened a bit at the sight of him. Future quirk. I gained experiences, memories, emotions, and a few physical changes from my future. Midoriya sighed. Better to let them know now than have them make things up. Everyone was silent as they stared at him. What is your future like? A girl asked. It's only flickers of memories. So I don't know. It was all just really random and boring things. Midoriya replied shortly. Okay. Their teacher took that moment to start opening the door, so everyone scrambled to their seats. Midoriya could feel Bakugo's gaze. But he said not a word to the blonde. Lunch came and a few people tried to destroy his lunch. But Midoriya just expertly dodged them and went to the roof. He felt a weird and uncomfortable déjà vu at his location of choice. How many times had he been up there in the past? Hundreds of times? Thousands of times? At this point he didn't know. All he knew was that he and rooftops had a love-hate relationship. Midoriya sighed and started eating his lunch. 5 minutes in, the door opened. He sharply looked back to the door, ready to fight whoever was coming to bully him, but instead he was met by sharp red eyes. Midoriya's own eyes softened at the sight of Bakugo. He and Bakugo had finally had a good relationship right before he died. He had died in a glorious blaze of power, taking down 50 villains at once. He had saved them all with that appealing but terrible attack. But his own explosions had turned on him as he overused his quirk. He was alive, but not for long. He was too weak to fight back when Shigaraki killed him with the rest of his classmates. Midoriya didn't want to think about it anymore, so he pushed it to the back of his mind. Bakugo. Or Kaken. Sorry. Midoriya greeted with his unusually soft voice. An odd sort of sadness and wistfulness laced his voice, making Bakugo a little confused. Bakugo felt as if there was something big he was missing. The nerd had come back different. Only a few days ago he had been his nerdy, sunshine self. Now he seemed withdrawn and tired. He had a mellow air to him, making everyone around him feel a slight sense of calm that even Bakugo was affected by. And his eyes, they were dull. Not like the gleaming emerald they should have been as they had been. He seemed older, wiser in ways no one would ever understand. Bakugo sat silently down in front of Midoriya, who continued eating with a soft look on his face. At some point Bakugo might have thought it for pity. Now all he felt was confusion. They sat silently for a minute. Bakugo fished his own lunch out and started eating it as well. He took out some hot sauce to put on it. Could I have some? I like my katsudon spicy. If you don't mind, of course. Midoriya asked politely. Bakugo scrunched his eyebrows. Since when did the nerd like spicy food? Normally he was a wimp about it. Sure, whatever. Bakugo replied gruffly, handing the bottle to the greenette. Midoriya took it with a small but grateful smile. Bakugo watched in horror as Midoriya proceeded to pour even more than he had. Midoriya then took a bite and let out a content hum. You always had such a good taste in hot sauce, Kaken. Midoriya sighed happily. He took some more bites and Bakugo reluctantly went back to eating. It took a few more minutes of eating for Bakugo to talk again. What happened to you, nerd? Like, what really happened to you? Bakugo asked. Midoriya stopped eating and gave him an amused look. I thought you'd see through me. Midoriya chuckled, and sadly, I can't tell. Not yet. Not here at the very least. Midoriya looked up to the sky and thought for a moment. Though I guess I could use your help, he mused. Bakugo scoffed and rolled his eyes. Of course you need my help, shitty nerd. You can't do anything by yourself. Bakugo mocked, or tried to at least. It came out a little less mocking than intended. Midoriya just smiled and fondly shook his head. Never change, Kaken. Never change. Midoriya grinned. What does that mean? Bakugo snapped. Nothing, nothing. Midoriya waved him off with a sly smile. Stop making fun of me, you shithead. Bakugo roared. I'm not. Chill. Midoriya laughed, putting his hands up in fake surrender. The two delved back into silence. But now it was amicable? When was the last time they had been able to just exist together like this? When they had 5 minutes of lunch left, Bakugo got up and walked to the door. But before he left, he turned one last time and met Midoriya's eyes. If you can't FNG talk here, come over to my house for dinner tonight. Bring Auntie Inko or some sheet if you want. I'll tell the hag you're coming. And then you're going to FNG talk? You got that, nerd? Bakugo demanded. Midoriya nodded. Then he left. Midoriya texted his mom about the dinner that night. She agreed that it would be smart to bring the Bakugis in on the deal. Of the Bakugis. Inko messaged Mitsuki to make sure everything was good. Ends up Mitsuki had been wanting to meet up as a family for a while since she only ever saw Inko alone. Inko promised to make mochi ice cream for dessert. School soon ended and Midoriya went back home. He made sure to give his mother a long hug before going to do some homework, something that he had not missed. Luckily he had forgotten most everything, so while it was easy, at least he was still learning things. Midoriya and Inko spent some time getting ready to leave. He got the stuff he had somehow brought back from his time, then set off mochi in hand. Midoriya made sure to wear his thick coat and a scarf that reminded him of Aizawa's. It was gray, thin and very long. It just lacked the functions of the scarf and was knitted. Inko knocked on the door and Mitsuki opened it. "Inko! Izuku!" she crowed, pulling them both into a hug. Midoriya smiled and held back tears. He remembered clearly how Mitsuki and Masaru died. Mitsuki had been recognized and attacked by a villain, much like Inko. Masaru had been so devastated and shocked that he had a slide and died while at work when he got the call. Midoriya hugged her tightly. When she did let go, she grabbed him again and held him in front of her, inspecting him. Midoriya gave her a tired smile. "I see what the brat meant about you being different. But no matter. You're still practically my fucking nephew." Mitsuki grinned. She led the two of them inside. Midoriya had forgotten what the house looked like. It had been a long while since he had seen it. 8 years in fact. Mitsuki had them sit down and got tea. Meanwhile she very aggressively called Bakugo down. Masaru came from the kitchen and greeted them both. He gave Midoriya a hug, which the boy relished in. Eventually they all settled on the 2 couches, tea in hand. Bakugo looked slightly disgruntled, but he wasn't complaining or being overly aggressive, despite how hostile he might have been towards Midoriya only days ago. "So, the brat said that he and Izuku needed to have ya talked." Mitsuki asked. "The F is he goin' on about?" Bakugo glared at her and she snapped a quick glare back. Midoriya laughed softly. "Yes, we do. But me and Mom have decided to bring you 2 in on it as well. The only reason we are even telling you guys this is because you're too DMN smart and would find out in the end anyways. Especially Katsuki, Kaken. I need to get used to calling him that again," Midoriya muttered at the end. The Bakugos all looked confused but slowly nodded. "The food spill?" Mitsuki demanded. Midoriya sighed and set down his tea. "I would put down your tea for this. It's quite shocking," Midoriya suggested. "Kaken, do you mind telling Auntie and Uncle how I was acting like just days prior? Since I have not seen them in quite a while. It will help with the context. You can also tell them what story you heard about me." Bakugo glared at him a bit but nodded. The nerd was normal as usual. Muttering all the time, happy as hell, never shutting up, being nerdy, writing his notebooks, etc. etc. And absolutely no scars that could be seen. Bakugo explained gruffly, then he doesn't come to school for a few days and when he comes back, he's wearing that fluffy as F coat all the time. He's speaking in that soft as F voice, he's pale, looks like death warmed over, and has all these scars on his hands and face. He didn't cower or look awkward when the extra asked him questions, he just answered them calmly. Our teacher said that the nerd had been hit with some quirk that was permanent. But he never said what the F it was. Then the nerd says that it's some future quirk that gave him experience, physical changes, flashes of memories, and personality changes from his future. Which honestly sounds effing weird. Bakugo finished with a huff. Midoriya chuckled fondly. Everyone was weirded out by how old he sounded despite him only being 13. Midoriya took a sip of his tea. "Every good lie has a bit of truth to it," Midoriya stated calmly. "It makes it easier to tell and easier to swallow." "So why lie then?" Masaru asked. "Because the full truth is too dangerous to get out. And of course, I do not trust most children or adults not to blab and F everything up." "When the F did you start cursing?" Bakugo exclaimed in surprise. Midoriya gave him an exasperated look. "Of all the questions you could have asked it was that?" Midoriya deadpanned. Mitsuki let out a startled laugh. "When did you grow up hair, kiddo?" Mitsuki crowed, thought this was the wrong thing to say. Midoriya suddenly got a very tired, weary look. "When I grew up," Midoriya sighed wearily, "or maybe it was after I watched 19 of my friends get brutally murdered." Inko cringed at his bluntness. The Bakugo family all dropped their teacups they had picked up again against better judgment. "What?" Masaru said in a strangled voice. "Allow me to explain." Midoriya grimaced, putting his own tea down. "My name is Izuku Midoriya Shinsu. My hero name is Deku. I am 23 years old and might have accidentally traveled back in time." Midoriya greeted, standing up to Boy a little cheekily. Who can blame him? He lived with Sass Lord Shinso for a good 8 years. The Bakugos all looked at him in disbelief. "You have got to be shitting me." They all intoned at the same time. Izuku is telling the truth. I didn't think he was at first too, to be honest. But there's irrefutable evidence? Inko smiled at them apologetically. Midoriya nodded and grabbed his bag. He unzipped it and started grabbing things out to show them. When I came back here, I brought back some things. I have no idea. Midoriya explained, this was my hero costume I was wearing when I got here. Midoriya showed them his green and white costume. Then Midoriya pulled out the gun. Which wasn't that smart since the Bakugas all looked at it in alarm. I was holding this when Oh, and here is my wallet with my hero license, credit card, and some pictures of my family and old classmates. Midoriya opened the wallet and only took out the license. He gave it to them to look at. You actually did it. Bakugu gaped. You actually became a hero. Midoriya snorted and nodded. I went to UA and everything. Though only for a year before the commission, may they be med, forced me to become a hero early due to a shortage of heroes. Midoriya rolled his eyes. Ugh, I am totally taking them down this time around. They are ridiculously corrupt. Honey, I think you've broken them. Inko pointed out. And indeed he had. The Bakugas were blue screening from the looks of it. Sorry, that must have been quite sudden. Midoriya hastily apologized. Izuku Mitsuki choked. How? How did you? No idea. Midoriya shrugged. It might be a quirk of my own I never noticed. Or someone else used their quirk on me. By now the family of 3 had collected themselves. Wait, you said your last name was Midoriya? Bakugu pointed out, then his jaw dropped as he realized. Midoriya covered his mouth and snorted. He pulled the necklace from around his neck and showed the family. I got married when I was 17. But the world was going to shitso me and Toshi just decided screw it. We had both been emancipated a while ago, so we could legally get married. Ended up being a good idea considering. Midoriya trailed off, suddenly looking very depressed. Inko sighed and patted him on the back as he stared into space, a traumatized look in his eyes. Not long after that bad things happened? Inko explained softly. Any later and the wedding would have been depressing from the sounds of it. Midoriya collected himself and stiffly nodded. Yes. He sighed. Sorry about that, I still have way too much unresolved trauma. Midoriya shook his head to disperse any thoughts. But yes, I'm married. And I have 2 children. I guess I had. That sounds weird as hell coming from a teen's mouth. Mitsuki commented. Well, I guess that makes sense. It's pretty weird for me too. I mean, I could hardly walk those first few days because I'm used to being taller, albeit not by too much sadly. Toshi always made fun of me for being short. But well, he's stuck in a wheelchair so he can SCK on that. Midoriya blinked and he grimaced. Oh, he's dead. I forgot about that. Midoriya spaced out again, hunching over a bit and clutching his teacup tightly. Inko cringed again. His husband died from a sickness, technically 2 weeks ago. Inko informed them. The Bakugu family paled and looked at the shaking Midoriya. Maybe I should let him explain. It took a minute for Midoriya to collect himself again. He took a deep, shaking breath. I'll start at the beginning. And so he did. He started with saving Bakugu and meeting All Might. He even told them about the quirk he would hopefully gain once more. He talked about training for the entrance exam and Dagoba Beach. Then he told them about what happened during the entrance exam. Midoriya laughed about how dumb he was and how he could have done so much better. He talked about saving Uraraka and Ida calling him out. Then he talked about Aizawa and the first day of school. He criticized himself a bit, thinking of the ways he could have cheated the system. Yeah, Dad was pretty cool. Midoriya suddenly choked when he realized he said. He's technically my stepdad since he's Hitoshi's father. Kind of weird how he's going to be my teacher and yours, soon. I'll have to get in the habit of calling him Aizawa-sensei again, dang. Too many names, he muttered, looking very annoyed. That got a few chuckles, but Midoriya quickly started again. He didn't explain exactly what happened. He hadn't even told his mom everything. He just said, a lot of bad things happened. No one died, but it got pretty close. UA was having a really bad year. Nizu never should have let All Might teach. He might have been a good hero, but he was a sheet teacher. Midoriya chuckled and shook his head sadly. I won't go in detail, since it is unneeded and would mess things up. But let's just say that things were chaotic. Midoriya explained All Might's retirement, not in full detail though. Oh, you got kidnapped, Kaken? Midoriya added casually, but I'm not going to let that happen again. Someone needs to get kidnapped in order for my plans to go through. But I'm sure I can get someone. Maybe I could pay you Rarika too, she'd do anything for money. And it's not like they hurt or starved you. And it was only for like 3 days, in a seedy but bar. Katsuki gets kidnapped? Masaru exclaimed. Midoriya gave him a deadpan look. I just said that. And I just said that it won't happen this time around. It's too dangerous. Midoriya explained a little impatiently. But why does Inko started? Midoriya shushed her. It's a secret. You are not allowed to know yet. It's too early. Midoriya continued like that hadn't happened. He got to the part about Eri, skipping the licensing altogether. Midoriya grinned and fished out his photos to show them. This is my daughter Eri. Technically Aizawa and Yamada fostered her, but she viewed them as grandparents really. If they could no longer care for her, she went to me and Hitoshi. She is such a lovely little girl. I can't wait to see her again. I'm going to save her again and teach her how to use her quirk better since I already helped her out before. And that beach overhaul is going to bite it. Midoriya scowled into the air, not looking at anything in particular. Overhaul? Masaru, Inko, Mitsuki, and Bakugu questioned. Leader of the Yakuza waved them off despite them all looking horrified. He wasn't so bad compared to others. Killed Naruto and made Mirio lose his quirk. All of which contributes to a whole bunch of bullshit later on in life. Funny how one domino can make the rest topple. Midoriya giggled and it sounded eerily unstable. A darkness haunted his eyes that made everyone shiver. Anyways, Midoriya chirped, taking a sip of his tea, I can't really tell you what happens after that since it would be too detrimental to the future. Let's just say there is a lot of bad people that need to either be saved or ended without mercy. Midoriya's voice was still eerily cheerful and it gave them all a bad feeling. Midoriya grinned into his tea. Aizawa Inko stammered, why you okay, baby? Midoriya seemed to snap out of whatever mania he was in and he looked at his mom. Sorry about that. Bad memories is all. Midoriya awkwardly apologized. Everyone else looked mildly disturbed and disbelieving but they nodded anyways. Are you really going to kill Deku? Bakugu scowled. I doubt you have the guts. Midoriya gave Bakugu a blank-faced stare. My body count is 35. Midoriya told him with a deadpan look, all of which were villains whom I either accidentally killed or purposely killed. Luckily most were an accident. And I only regret 2 of those deaths. The room was stifling as that dark intelligence glimmered in those murky green eyes. No one spoke for a few moments. Then Midoriya got up. He sighed and pinched the bridge of his nose. This is depressing and frankly bad for all of our mental health. Midoriya sighed, which is why I think we should isodash. What happened to me? Bakugu suddenly blurted, you never said a word about what happened to me. Or Andi. Or the hag and the old man. Suddenly everyone realized that he hadn't. Midoriya froze. Inko's face went oddly blank. The Bakugus felt a shiver go down their spines. Midoriya gave them a sad, dark look. Don't ask questions you don't want the answers to, Midoriya told them darkly. As I was saying, this conversation is done. I'll tell you what else is needed as time goes on. For now, I need your help. Everyone in the room, even Inko, looked intrigued by this. Midoriya smirked a bit at their interest. There is a little under 2 years until the UA entrance exams, which is where everything starts. Before that point I am going to have to alter some things. Some things that might be questionable legally. Midoriya looked out a window as he spoke, I'm going to go vigilante for a bit. Luckily the law can't get me due to my current quirkless status. Since if I do not use my quirk and never attack first, I can't be convicted. There is a detective with a lie-detecting quirk who was a good friend of mine in the future and one of the few people I knew who actually made it out in the end. He's a good man whom I trust with my life. Everything else I do will have no evidence and thus not a problem. Luckily I got good at hiding bodies when me and Shinso killed that guy back when we were teens. Midoriya smiled fondly at the memory. After Muscular killed the wild pussycats and nearly raped our son, we decided that we were done with his bullshit. I had taken him down before, and he only escaped jail when Tartarus was destroyed. So, I of course killed him with the help of my darling husband. It's amazing how easy it is to destroy all evidence of a body with acid. Midoriya giggled as he remembered everything. We almost got caught. Well, Aizawa and Yamada caught us, but they turned a blind eye. Good times, good times. Everyone in the room looked a bit off-put, but after hearing the whole RPE thing they decided they too would let it slide. Back to the subject though. You two are fashion designers for some hero companies. I would love if you were to help me by making my costume. Any other way would be illegal and would take a while. And the faster we do this the better. Midoriya smiled confidently. I trust you to make a good design and have good functions. That is, if you will help out. If you do not want to get involved in this, that is perfectly reasonable too. Oh, Helizuku. Mitsuki shook her head. Of course we'll help you. If we can change the future, then it'll all be worth it. Masaru agreed. Midoriya shuffled over to them and hugged them with a happy smile on his face. Thank you so much. This means so much. You might be saving thousands by helping me with this. Midoriya cheered. Mitsuki and Masaru smiled and hugged the beaming boy back. Bakugo ched and glared. But it was half-hearted at best. Inko teared up at seeing her son so happy. That night they started their schemes. It wasn't long until everything was ready. The Bakugos made quick, inconspicuous work. Bakugo even helped train his muscle memory and body a bit more while they waited. Midoriya was still pretty quiet about his plans. But they all knew he was planning on saving Eri, helping Koda, and turning some future villains into allies. But that was all really. The whole situation was weird, to say the very least. Midoriya acted so different that it almost seemed impossible that a short time ago he was happy, optimistic, quiet, and meek. Now Midoriya was unusual hyper, obviously depressed, very sassy, a little sheet, bold, and yet still oddly quiet. He almost always spoke in that soft tone of voice, especially around people he didn't know or cared much about. In fact, he hardly talked at all around them and usually elected to ignore them. But when around Inko and the Bakugos, he got louder and a lot more open. They all got used to petty little pranks, sarcasm, random memes, quotes from movies that did not exist yet, odd experiments, and other crazy things. He honestly acted like a feral child high on weed. The reason he was so hyper was quickly found. At some point they were all over at the Bakugos for dinner, and Midoriya was jittery and twitchy, wanting to move around and do something but too respectful to do so. Bakugo had had enough. He snapped. Midoriya looked over to him and raised an eyebrow. Why the F are you so jittery all the demon time? Are you high or something? Midoriya gave Bakugo a confused look. No? Why would I be high? I hate drags. I once had someone force me to try weed and it was god-awful. Literally put me in a headlock to do it. Never again. Midoriya shook his head wisely. Used to Midoriya's weird stories, they only raised an eyebrow and went back to eating. Seriously though, I am also concerned. You do seem very hyper, Izuku. It's not normal for people to have that much energy without help. Masaru pointed out. Midoriya blinked, then went into deep thought. Admittedly, he too had been thinking of it. Then it clicked and his eyes widened. Those beasts. Midoriya scowled. Of course it's their fault. Midoriya sighed and pinched his nose. Whose fault? Inko politely asked. Midoriya looked back up and off into the distance and glared at nothing. The Hero Commission. They had me overworked. I'm used to running off of 2 hours of sleep at most, and then running on that little energy and a shit ton of caffeine. While still feeling dead tired. I ran around most of whatever city I was in through the day running on empty. And after Hitoshi got sick, I was running on no sleep for a bit. Went until I passed out or was drugged pretty much. So, now that I'm getting 8 hours of sleep on a normal night and still drinking a cup of coffee in the morning, I have more energy than I'm used to running on. They looked at him in horror. How are you even alive? Bakugo asked incredulously. Midoriya gave him a deadpan look. Spite. Midoriya replied. You better not overwork yourself again, young man. Inko demanded sternly, I will not tolerate you hurting yourself. Midoriya gave her a loving smile. I know, Mom. It wasn't even my fault I was overworked. I tried going to commission and demanding a whole lot less hours. But they had me tight in their grasp. And those hours of sleep I had was the only time I got to see Hitoshi. I knew the end was coming for the both of us. So, I did what I had to do and spent my remaining time with him. Lord knows he deserved it. Midoriya's eyes went dark. If I had just been around more, I would have noticed sooner. Not until it was too late. I could have stopped him from dying. If only I had been there. Midoriya scowled and aggressively stabbed a piece of meat with his fork. Everyone was silent. You know, you never mentioned how you even traveled here. Mitsuki commented, breaking the thick silence. Midoriya clutched the fork so hard it bent in his hand. Midoriya looked down at the utensil in surprise. Then he carefully bent it back so it was right again. Midoriya sighed. That is not relevant information. Midoriya told them in a dead voice. Honey, maybe you should tell them. They could help and support you. Inko murmured, looking at her son in loving concern. I said it is not relevant. Midoriya hissed, then caught himself. Sorry. He muttered. He got up from the table and left. They never asked about it or mentioned it again. The hyper solution ended up being fixed not long after that. Because his vigilante outfit was done and his equipment was in. When Midoriya got both packages, he grinned and went to try them on. Once he was fully suited, he looked into a mirror. He loved it. The outfit was based off of the pre-Quark era. He based it off of a lot of old technology. And it all had to do with his name, Polaroid. His bodysuit made of self-healing fabric and laced with a light but strong metal, and was a dark black-brown. Over it was an old-looking leather aviator jacket with a furry hood. His knees and elbows were outfitted with metal pads that packed a good punch. And the brown gloves he wore had retractable claws, like a cat, as well as small metal pads on the knuckles. Set on his face was a black-brown face mask the same color and self-healing fabric as the bodysuit. It was outfitted with a voice changer that made his voice sound older, a lot like how he sounded when he was still an adult actually. Over his green eyes were round glasses that looked like they were made of camera lenses. His shoes were metal-soled combat boots. Long rainbow socks poked out from under them. Midoriya did not bother to hide his green hair as it looked black in the dark. Plus, it hardly mattered. Midoriya has also ordered a lot of equipment. He found someone on the black market who made and sold Polaroid cameras with his quirk. He was desperate for business, so the prices were cheap and everything was in bulk. He ended up buying quite a lot of them. He also bought a lot of knives, a bow staff, a mock eraser head scarf, very bright flashlights, first aid kits, mini strobe lights, a walkie-talkie set, a Walkman, old bulky headphones, and a whole lot of camera film. He was ready. He ran and showed it off to his mother, who loved it and quickly sent a picture to Mitsuki, who also loved it and was damn proud she made it. The first night he went out as the vigilante Polaroid, Midoriya was ecstatic. His mother was worried, but that was a given. Midoriya had to assure her he was experienced, and even then, she was worried. But that was what mothers were for after all. He ended up jumping out the window come nightfall and running around the alleyways of Mustafu and the red light district. He was used to working at night since he was basically half of an underground hero. He also knew just how to find trouble and put a stop to it. So, it was not a surprise he arrested 13 people in one night. It seemed that one thing that never changes was how terrible the red light district was. His fighting style was interesting, and of course made it look like he had a quirk. He used the two cameras he had to do certain things. One was modified by him to not take pictures but flash different kinds of very bright lights. They would disorient, distract, and blind people. The other camera had some of the same functions but was mainly for taking actual Polaroid pictures. He made sure to take a picture of every crime scene and leave it for the police to find after calling in. Funny how they never changed the passcode loop for the police department and the hero comms. There was the same looped passwords 10 years into the future. He would have to make sure to change that this time around. It might explain why they were so easy to hack by some criminals. He did not talk yet, just secretly listened in from his walkie-talkie. He couldn't help but shed a small tear when he heard Aizawa's voice on the comms. In the end he messaged Tsukachi's number with the locations. He did not answer the man's questions, just sent the places. He could almost imagine the surprise and annoyance the detective would be feeling. That night the police force knew they had some new vigilante on their hands that no villain knew the look of due to his flash quirk. When Midoriya heard all that on the comms he smirked. Guess his plan was working out. He got home early into the morning and ended up getting a few hours of sleep. That was more than enough compared to the measly hours he used to be getting. A cup of coffee in the morning was enough to get him going for the day and still have a good amount of energy left. School was a breeze since relearning things was easy. So, he was not afraid to sleep during school, which his teachers always allowed in mild fear of him. Ever since a kid tried to stab him with a pencil in class and he flipped the kid over without looking, then jumped out the window, scaled down a tree, then flipped them all off, no one bothered him. And the few who did got the same treatment. They were never hurt enough to constitute a nurse, and it never even left bruises, so he was safe. So, he could take naps throughout the day. It took a whole 2 weeks of getting into the swing of things for him to finally speak into the comms. "Hey, Polaroid calling in. You need to change your passwords?" Midoriya grinned as he sat on a roof and talked into the comms. He was looking down at a fight of 30 opposing gang members. It was some turf war. And there was quite a lot of injuries and quirk use. It was way too big for him to take care of on his own. He could if he had one for all already. But that wasn't an option as of the moment. And it wasn't like it ever was going to be. Even if he got one for all early. He couldn't use his quirk just yet. "Who are you?" Aizawa snapped. A few other underground heroes said the same near the same time. "I told you already." Midoriya sighed. "It's Polaroid. There are no heroes called that in this area." One of the other heroes, Aftershock, pointed out the obvious. No sheet Sherlock." Midoriya deadpanned. It was silent for a moment. "Did you really just openly admit that?" Ariel, another underground hero, muttered. "Of course, silly." Midoriya giggled. "It wouldn't be logical to try and hide it, as I will be in even more legal trouble when you eventually get me. Not that I'll let you. You'll find my identity on my own terms." "Legal trouble, kid? You're already going to be in trouble enough." Aizawa growled. Midoriya laughed lightly. Clause 437 of the Quirk and Hero Laws. Any person who pretends or claims to be a hero is able to get 2 years or less of jail time and/or a fine of 9,000 yen under the jurisdiction of the law. Midoriya recited, having been forced to memorize the law many years ago. Silence again. Midoriya took that as an opportunity to go on. "Technically I am a vigilante, but if I do things right I can either get into a rehabilitation program or get a full pardon. But if I go against that law, it would just get me in more trouble. So technically if I do a good job, as I already have been, I could get pardoned and allowed to get a hero license. Not to mention I don't really like going against the law unless needed to. And it's not like anything I do that is overly illegal will have enough evidence to be used against me. Also, I'm not a kid. I'm 23. What the F, kid?" Aizawa groaned. Midoriya snickered at his annoyance. "Yeah, so I need some help over at XXXX. There is a gang fight between about 30 people, 16 on one side to 14 on the other. Lots of quirk use. Some injuries. An ambulance or 2 will be needed. It's too much for me to handle alone. I'm going to make like a banana and split. See ya. And say hi to Nao-Nao-chan for me." That's Tsukachi, just to clarify. Midoriya let the line go dead and ran off to home. He made sure no one followed him, just in case one of the heroes arrived early. Luckily no one did. He went through the same song and dance as before, but now he talked on the comm lines. They changed the passwords luckily, but it was still stupidly easy to hack for him. He had learned it to help with cases. At this point everyone was resigned to his presence. Midoriya wondered how long it would be until Tsukachi came on to the comms to talk to him. He was still only sending locations to him from his burner phone. He was waiting for the man to come to him himself. It took a whole month of him being active when the man finally went on the comms. "Polaroid." Tsukachi sighed. "Why are you doing this?" Midoriya grinned in the darkness. That night the man finally responded. "I was waiting for you to come on now." Midoriya chirped. genuinely happy. Oh God, you're actually call me that? Tsukachi groaned, never call me that godforsaken nickname again. And how did you even get my number or my name? Midoriya knew the man's quirk worked over the phone, so he decided to mess with him. You gave it to me. Midoriya hummed. When? Tsukachi choked. Midoriya let out a little cackle. Exactly 5 years and 10 days ago now. No. Midoriya crowed, but it's not like you're going to ever find out how or why. Why does that register as true? Tsukachi sighed miserably, and I told you to stop calling me that. Well, you may hate it, but I've been calling you that for years and that never seemed to bother you before. Midoriya smirked. He stumbled into a fight and started fighting them as he spoke. He was happy his headset that normally played music was also connected to the comms, so he didn't have to hold his walkie-talkie anymore. I've literally never met you before. Much less talked to you before now. Tsukachi pointed out, and I would remember anyone who dared call me now. Well, I've met you but you wouldn't remember me. You won't ever remember me and our interactions. Just the affects of a quirk. But that's fine, because I get to be friends with you again. Midoriya smiled a little fondly as he tied up the criminals he had swiftly taken down. Tsukachi was silent. You're telling the truth, so you're saying I have met you before but can't remember due to some quirk? Yet I have met you before and we were even friends? He elaborated. More or less. It's much more complicated than that, but that's the premise of it. And let me guess, you aren't going to tell me the rest of it. Not yet. But be patient. When? Don't know. But I can tell you it's going to be a while. That isn't helpful at all. I'm well aware Nauna dash. Don't. No can do Nauna dash. Don't you dare. Naunauchan. I hate you. No you don't. No I really do. We are going to be best friends now. I highly doubt that. Come on. You're like only 5 years older than me. So, you really are 23. Yup. Ugh, I'm too tired for this. Me too old man. Hey, I'm only 5 years older than you. Exactly. Shut up. It was a whole 2 months into being a vigilante when Midoriya decided that the time was right to start his plans. He had taken those first 2 months to get back into the swing of things and to get back some of that much-needed muscle memory. It also took him that long to get used to his slightly shorter stature that he knew no matter how much training he did would always remain on the shorter side. Curse Shinso for being so tall. It meant he could make fun of him along with everyone else. Midoriya started his plans by meeting with Aizawa. So far, he had seen the man but had hidden in the shadows. At this point everyone was desperate to get a look of him. He hadn't let anyone see him yet, and Aizawa was a good start. It would make him more recognizable by heroes and police who were reluctantly starting to grow used to him. And it would show that he trusted them. He set his night for the exact day of the 2nd month in his vigilante career. Hey Eraserhead. Midoriya chirped on his private line between him and the hero. Meet me at XXXX. I want to get to know each other. The comms were silent for a moment. Sure kid. Aizawa grunted. Tsukachi confirmed I was 23. I'm not a kid. Midoriya joked, knowing full well he was still a kid technically. I no problem child. Midoriya did not flinch at that achingly familiar name. He did not, but you're still younger than me and act like a child. You are a problem child, no doubts about it. Well, if you so insist, I will continue to live up to my name. I would prefer if you didn't. But then it would be so boring. You mean quiet? It would be quiet. Yes, and the quiet is when the loud things seem so much scarier. At this point, every person who had talked to Polaroid in some way or form was used to Polaroid's weird behavior and mannerisms. Oftentimes he would say something then stop talking for a few minutes. Not even reacting to anything. And with no sounds of fighting in the background, they knew he was just being plain silent. Other times he would impart oddly wise wisdom. Oh, and despite being so rambunctious and hyper, he talked in this oddly calm and sad tone. It was rare to hear cheer in his voice for most people. He only ever seemed super enthusiastic around Tsukachi and Aizawa. All other times were painfully forced cheer or plain sarcasm. I'm here kid. Midoriya looked up and saw a dark figure with a walkie-talkie up to his mouth. Midoriya nearly cried when he saw the man, but kept in the tears. He couldn't get emotional right now. He could cry himself to sleep later if the need arose. As it likely would. "Hi, Aizawa," Midoriya chirped. Aizawa flinched and got into a fighting stance. "How the hell do you know my civilian identity?" he growled lowly. Midoriya put his hands up in surrender. "Oh, sorry. I'm just used to calling you Aizawa is all," Midoriya placated, "and I know because you are in the same boat as now." Aizawa stopped, narrowed his eyes, then straightened. "How much do you know?" he asked threateningly. "That your husband is Yamada Hisashi, present Mike. That you have 3 cats named Kimchi, Biasurdi and Beyonce. You are looking to adopt an older child. You work at UA teaching class 1A. And so on." Midoriya answered dutifully. Aizawa looked shocked then quickly schooled his expression. "I don't trust that at all. But I wouldn't be surprised if you knew me through the detective as we are friends and co-workers in a way. But until you prove it, I'm not buying." Aizawa decided, crossing his arms. "That is perfectly reasonable. You never know who could be a traitor until it is too late." Midoriya agreed lowly. Aizawa watched in slight concern as his eyes darkened. Then it hit him that he could see the man. He was short and young-looking. Maybe it was from some kind of quirk. Or his own. Though his had to do with light flashes, but you never knew nowadays. And it seemed his costume was largely based off the pre-quirk era, specifically old Polaroid cameras. The boy had 2 of them hanging off his waist in fact. His outfit was rather nice looking actually. Professionally done. Likely some illegal source. While Aizawa was observing all of this, Midoriya was stuck deep in memories. He was thinking about who the UA traitor was. How all along one of his classmates was a mole. And worst of all, she didn't even really want to do it. Not all the way at least. But she was stuck between a rock and a hard place. He didn't blame. "You look pretty young, kid." Aizawa smirked. Snapped out of his memories, Midoriya looked up and stomped his foot indigently. "I know," he huffed. "I am constantly told that. It doesn't help that my tree of a husband dash." Midoriya stopped in his tracks as he realized he had done messed up. Aizawa's eyes went wide as saucers and he looked at Midoriya with plain shock. "You're married," he muttered. "Don't seem the type." Midoriya scowled and glared at him, deciding to roll with the mistake. "Well, you don't seem the type either, but here we are." Midoriya shot back. Aizawa rolled his eyes but had to admit he had it. "So, Pollard, why are you trusting me with your appearance now? Why or anyone else or your precious Nauna? I'm going to be reporting this, you know." "Oh, I know. But I would trust you with my life, Aizawa." Midoriya said this seriously, his childlike nature gone in a flash. "I have plans, Aizawa. Big plans. Plans that have a whole lot more resting on them than you may ever know." Aizawa watched as Midoriya's eyes went dark from beneath his slightly tinted glasses. He could feel a depressive, dark aura surround the boy. He looked at Aizawa with painfully dead eyes. "That is why I am warning you now. Do not interfere. Do not question me. I know so much more than you could ever hope to understand, and trust me, it is terrifying. You are a logical man, Shota. And so am I. Heed my advice and tell others to as well. Or you may come to regret the future you made." Midoriya's camera was out in a literal flash. Aizawa was blinded as he heard the shutter snap. And once the spots were out of his eyes, Midoriya was no longer there. Aizawa ended up reporting everything to Tsukachi, of course. He told the man about the weird message he had gotten from the boy. And then he talked about his appearance. Then he broke the news that the boy had claimed that he was in the same boat as the detective. Tsukachi was surprised but took it in stride. "So, it seems he was affected by the quirk primarily. Is it possible he was hit by a quirk that made everyone forget him?" Tsukachi pondered. "Or is his quirk more than it seems?" "I don't think those flashes are his quirk," Aizawa said, as he mulled over the events of the night. "Why would you say that?" Tsukachi asked. "The cameras. It had a really bright light. He might have modified the cameras he uses to make those flashes and make it look like it's his quirk while hiding his real one," Aizawa replied. Tsukachi's mouth dropped open as he realized the mistake they had made. Then he groaned and buried his face in his hands. "Of course. We should have put that together. With the pictures and flashes that remind the criminals of cameras. Ugh, we are so dense." Tsukachi sighed. Aizawa nodded, even he should have been able to put it together up before now. Is it possible he has a quirk that makes people forget him? Aizawa wondered. I don't know. For all we know, it could be his quirk or a quirk he was unfortunately hit with. Or it could be some sort of body-altering quirk, where he looks and sounds different. Maybe even an alter ego quirk. I'm too tired for this. As my students would say, mood. Was there anything else odd? Now that you mentioned it, oh sheet? What? Aizawa repeated what the kid had told him before running off. Oh sheet. Midoriya avoided Aizawa for a while. He had planted the seeds in the man's mind, and likely the detectives. He needed to get them thinking. Meanwhile, he worked on his new project. He had already located his old house. He would not call it a home, since it wasn't even close to one. A house of abuse and misery is no home. He had gathering evidence, and after a week had more than enough to get them arrested and put in jail forever. Hitoshi had been saved by Aizawa and Yamada right after the sports festival. He had been quickly fostered and then adopted after that. Midoriya was going to speed that process up a bit. He had long come to terms that things wouldn't be the same this time around. He still loved Shinso with all of his heart. He knew it was a little weird since he was technically older than him. But it ends up he had been changed quite a lot in his travel back. To his mother's request, they had gone in for some brain scans just to make sure everything was healthy up there. Ends up he had a perfectly normal teenage brain. Teenage, not adult. And it had certainly explained his more childish behavior. It was like he had the memories of an adult as well as the experience. But his mind had regressed. He still got emotional due to the hormones his teenage brain cursed him with. And he couldn't help but look at some cute boy or girl and blush despite not being attracted to them in the slightest. Not to mention the sheer want to cause chaos. And the annoyance towards adult figures. He didn't know how to feel about this. It felt odd since he was an adult. But still a kid? He decided to think of it as the time as a child he lost. The time he lost to bullies. To worrying his overworking mom. To Shigaraki. To the war. To death and depression and destruction. When he and his mother were heading home from the appointment, she had said, "You grew up too fast, Izuku. And now you get the chance to be a child once again. Don't waste it." Then she had smiled warmly at him and went back to driving. And Midoriya decided that he wasn't going to. Now that he and Bakugo were friends again, they sometimes spent their evenings doing things normal teenagers would do. They went to the arcade. To the movies. To zoos with their family. Sometimes Midoriya would cry himself to sleep, weeping for the time he lost and grateful for the time he got back. For the opportunity he had. He just wondered how this even came to be. Midoriya enacted his plans for Shinso sooner than he thought, and he couldn't be happier about it. How he did it was simple. He dropped a file with all the evidence and a short explanation right to the Yamada Aizawa household. He made sure to paint Shinso in a glowing light, talking about his independence, kindness, attitude, and charming sass. But he also made sure to emphasize his mistreatment. A week later, Midoriya checked the Shinso household and was triumphant. It was empty and surrounded by police tape. Midoriya secretly checked on the Aiza household and saw Shinsu's new room occupied by the boy. Midoriya actually did cry as he silently watched Shinso read something on his phone. Then he left because he felt like he was being a little creepy. Were these feelings he had for Shinso right? He was 23, nearly 24 now. He had a 10-year difference technically. Was he a terrible person for loving him? But would it be wrong for him to love anyone else? Could he even love anyone else? Midoriya got home from his earlier patrol schedule sobbing. His mother heard him despite his attempts to muffle his sobs. She ran out and saw him hunched over, using the wall as support. His hand covered his mouth and tears dripped from his eyes. She went over and pulled him into a hug, wondering what was wrong. "Baby, what's wrong?" she gently asked after a few minutes of crying. "Can I even love Hitoshi? Is that right?" Midoriya choked through his sobs. "I'm an adult. 23. But at the same time I'm 13. I only want to love him. But what if he doesn't want me? Am I disgusting for loving him? Am I a terrible perverted person? It feels so wrong. But I still love him. No matter his age. But if it is wrong, no adult would date me because of my physical age. Am I just cursed to be stuck in between everything? Inko could only hold her son and think deeply. Izuku? What age do you feel like? Inko delicately asked. Midoriya looked up at her with confused and watery eyes. They were eyes that were hurt but still young. I don't know. Midoriya sniffled. Some days I feel old. Like an adult. But other days I just feel like a kid again. I can't give you a straight answer. But dear, I think you are just a teen cursed with painful memories and experiences. I told you before, you grew up too fast. I see you as a child, my child. Perfect, wonderful, loving child. Inko hugged her son tighter as he silently cried into her shoulder. Take time to think and decide. I trust you to do what you feel is right. I love you, Mom. Midoriya hiccuped, his breath hitching with every syllable. I love you to baby. Inko sniffled, tears of her own springing up. They sat that way for a long time. Midoriya made sure to keep an eye on the new family of 3 from then on. He didn't know how this large change would blow over. He didn't want to lose Shinso again. He continued acting as Polaroid. Though he now started letting heroes see him more, though he never stayed around for long. Now it was time to start his other plans. Things were going to start going fast now that this was taken care of. Shinso was in a constant state of shock and confusion. One day he was being locked up and muzzled by his parents. And the next the police were strolling in, arresting said parents, and asking him questions about his home life. Then he wasn't placed in some shitty foster home as he expected. No, he was put with his 2 favorite heroes who just so happened to be married. Like, what the F dash? Everything went so fast. He had no idea how anyone heard about him, much less cared enough to put him with nice people. He had no idea why these people he hardly knew were being so kind to him. And he most certainly had no idea what to do about all this. For now, he just hid in his room. Aizawa and Yamada, as he was asked to call the 2 heroes, left him alone for the most part. They brought him food or occasionally chatted with him for short PRDS of time. They never pushed him. When he wasn't able to fall asleep, someone would slip a pad of melatonin tablets under the door. When he had a nightmare, someone opened his door a crack, dropped a cat off, normally kimchi, as well as a mug of chamomile lavender tea through it. When he needed clothes, they asked his size and grabbed what he thought he would like and were startling accurate most of the time. When they saw his fraying phone, they got him a new one. When they found out he liked some sort of food, they would try and get it for him. And never once did they push him in any way. They were just Sometimes he felt someone watching him from his room. He had his very own room, but he never saw anyone anywhere. It was odd, but he never mentioned it to his new guardians. It felt unneeded. He didn't talk to them much. Everyone around him had always been adamant on him keeping his mouth shut. But he found out that the couple hardly cared whether he talked or not. Though they said they would love to hear him talk more. But that he could do whatever he was comfortable with. Which sure was weird. He never got to make his own decisions. Much less the ones that made him feel comfortable. It took him a whole month to get used to everything. And even then he was only just used to it. He was starting to talk more. Sometimes even sing around them, as he secretly loved to do. Yamada was ecstatic when he found out he liked to sing and also knew English. Aizawa pretended to be annoyed when he found out, but it was obviously very fake. They all knew he was a softa deep down. Shinso started to eat dinner with them. And during these dinners everyone was fine with either being comfortably silent or idly chatting away. It was on one of their louder days that Shinso asked a question that had been on his mind for a long time. Aizawa, Yamada? Shinso asked softly, how did you guys find out about me? Aizawa and Yamada looked at him in surprise, then quickly composed themselves. Have you heard of Polaroid? Aizawa asked. Shinso shook his head. He is a vigilante that became active a few months ago. Yamada helpfully interjected. Aizawa hummed in agreement as he stirred his curry a bit. Polaroid is a mystery. Says he's 23 but looks like a child. He said that he knew me and Tsukachi, but due to a quirk we cannot remember him. Aizawa sighed. Shinso scrunched his eyebrows in confusion. That certainly was odd. Yeah, he calls Tsukachi Nao-Nao-chan. Yamada couldn't help but add with a snort. Shinso burst into laughter. He knew the detective due to him being the person on his case as well as a family friend of his guardians. He came over for dinner every once in a while, and even then he would stop by just to check up on them. He was nice, but certainly not the kind of person to take to a nickname like Naonachan. The fact that anyone would call the man that was hilarious. But what does this have to do with me? Shinso asked once he had composed himself again. As said before, Polaroid is odd. He is an absolute chaos gremlin problem child. Aizawa shook his head and sked a bit. And yet he speaks so softly most of the time and is an overall collected person. He once warned me to not question or try to stop what he does because I might come to regret the future I made. Shinso frowned. What an odd thing to say. He also told me to tell everyone else. Not to mention he knew way too much about me. He even knew the names of the cats. Aizawa gestured to the 3 cats in question who were playing on their cat tower across the room. So needless to say, I don't think he's lying. Especially since he seems to know me personally. It is quite frustrating that I don't know who he is, yet he knows me. And what he said about making the future? He sounded so dead serious in that moment and his eyes just screamed of untold horrors. All of us who have met him think he has some bad PTSD. He will sometimes say something and just zone out. And he'll jump when he sees certain people or hears anything too loud. And he'll always get this dark, haunted look in his eyes when he does that. Aizawa got a concerned glint in his eyes as he frowned deeper, continuing to nudge his food. Yamada got the same look on his own eyes. Shinso had seen them look at him in the same way before. It made him wonder who this person was. I have taken what he said seriously, and so had Tsukachi. He takes down more villains than the average hero, and he never maims. So we decided to just work with him and not capture him at the moment. And to trust him on the things we deem safe. And one day, he just drops off some package on our doorstep, and in it was a whole case file with evidence of you being abused. Yamada continued for his husband. We brought it to the detective and well, it was all true. Polaroid even left us a note. It said, "Take care of Shinso for me. He's a perfect fit for you guys. Please try it out. I know you have been looking to foster or adopt a teen. And he deserves all the love he can get." Shinso was absolutely floored. And so was his jaw since it dropped there. To think that this random person cared about him enough to beg someone to take him in. Someone this Polaroid knew was good. He really seems to care about you, kid. Aizawa smiled. Polaroid is a pretty good guy for being an illegal vigilante with a potentially very dangerous quirk. He is constantly giving tip-offs for abuse cases. Though this is the first case he got this much involved in. It's odd. But I'm glad, because it brought you into our lives. Aizawa brought a tentative hand across the table and gently put it over Shinso's. Shinso teared up and practically leaped across the table to the man. The two embraced, which quickly became 3 when Yamada joined in. Once Shinso had cried himself out, he smiled up at his family. Thanks, Buzz. Aizawa and Yamada both choked on air. Then they hugged him. Tighter and smiled happily. They sat there on the floor for a long time. Then Shinso's eyes snapped open and he realized something. Do you guys ever get the weird feeling that someone is watching you at random moments of the night? Shinso blurted, officially ruining the moment. Aizawa and Yamada looked down at him in pure confusion. Not usually, no. They both intoned at the same time. Well, I do every few nights. It won't last for long, but I can just feel someone looking at me. Shinso swore. Do you think it's this Polaroid dude? If he's a vigilante, he mainly works at night, right? So, it would make sense if he checked up on me. Aizawa and Yamada's eyes widened. Then Aizawa groaned and dropped his head into his hands. Then he pulled a walkie-talkie out, fiddled with it, and brought it to his face. Polaroid, do you copy? Aizawa asked in an exasperated tone. A little bit of static came from over the line, then a voice. It's a little early, Zawa. A voice said from the other line, I was only just getting my work uniform on. Shinso could hear the teasing tone in the man's voice. And yet it was somehow still soft? He could see what Aizawa meant by odd. You know where I live? Aizawa accused. I know that you named your cat Kimchi because you found him in an empty can of kimchi as a kitten, where he had gotten stuck. Of course, I know where you live. Polaroid answered in a deadpan voice. And you have been spying on us? It's not spying. I'm just making sure Shinso is doing well. I'm not taking any risks. But you have gone to our house and watched him through his window for a few minutes every 4 days between the times of 7:45 and 9 p.m. That is worryingly specific. Time is a fickle thing, Eraserhead. It would do everyone some good to keep track of it. Come over. No, but how do I know you won't just arrest me? I promise you that I won't. Fine. But I haven't grabbed dinner yet, so there better be food. The line went dead and Aizawa sighed, pinching his nose. Well, that went as well as expected. Did you just invite a technically wanted cryptid vigilante into our house? Yamada asked with a raised brow. Yes. Aizawa groaned. Then there was a knock on the door. That was fast. Shinso commented, a tingle of excitement in his stomach. He could finally meet the person who saved him. Aizawa got up and opened the door. Shinso's eye widened when he saw the vigilante, who was at least a foot shorter than him. Zawa, you finally invited me over. Polaroid grinned from under his mask, his eyes shaded by his round glasses gleaming with mirth. Should I take off my shoes or nah? If you could take them off, that would be nice. Aizawa sighed, letting the vigilante in. Polaroid did as he was asked and bounced in, his long rainbow socks stark against his darker scheme. He had tiny feet too, Shinso couldn't help but notice. The vigilante's entire stature seemed petite. Oh, Yamada and Shinso. Polaroid gasped when he saw them. Then he ran forward and skid to a stop in front of them last minute. His soft voice was full of delight. I have been waiting so long to see you two again. And not just through a window, huh? Polaroid grinned, then he reached into one of his pockets and fished a few photos out. He dumped the pile into Yamada's hands. I took a whole bunch of pictures of these random stray cats I feed. They really like me for some reason. They like meow and purr every time they set eyes on me. Though they might just be begging for food. Polaroid enthused dorkily. He started pointing at random photos. That's Eclipse. And Suki. And Poyo. Oh, that's Gomez. And that's Smudge, John, James, Bemo, and Gigi. They all watched in confusion as Polaroid happily babbled on about the cats in the photographs. Finally, Yamada laughed and set the photos on a nearby counter. That's cool and all, listener. But I think Shota here called you in for something? Yamada grinned. Polaroid straightened and nodded. Sorry. I just get so excited. I hardly get to talk to people like you guys. Polaroid's voice got dark and sad. Everyone else is too scared of me or plain hates my guts. Or they're dead. Polaroid slumped a bit. Most of them are dead. No one said anything for a moment. Then Polaroid perked back up like nothing happened. Though no one missed the lingering pain in his eyes. So, what do you have for me, Zawa? Polaroid asked impishly. Aizawa looked at the boy in concern but put it away for the time being. I just wanted you to see that Shinso is doing well. Aizawa replied. You all can call me Hitoshi. Shinso blurted. Yamada teared up and hugged Shinso tight. Aizawa smiled into his scarf. Oh, it seems that everything is going well. I'm glad, Shinso. Polaroid cheered, looking genuinely happy. You're included in that, you know. Shinso hummed. You did get me out of that terrible place after all. Polaroid froze and choked. Oh, he said in a surprised, slightly strangled voice. That's cool, Toshi. I like it. Though I can't think of any good ones for you, cameraman. Shinso smirked. If there was one thing I didn't miss, it had to be the sass. Polaroid rolled his eyes fondly. They all froze. So did Polaroid. IF dash. Polaroid swore. Why is it that my godforsaken teenage mind can't keep shut? Each god F damn it. You said you were 23. Aizawa exclaimed incredulously. Yeah, well, I don't really know what age I am right now. Polaroid cried in annoyance. I can't seem to decide between being an adult or a teenager, and sadly it is causing me a bit of an identity crisis. What the hell does that even mean? I have no clue either. All I know is that it's effing with me. So how old are you? I said I have no clue. How can you not know your own age? Ever heard of age quirks? Or time quirks? Or memory quirks? So, you do have a time quirk? I never said that. But you are always talking about time and it's too much of a coincidence to ignore. I have literally no idea what is going on and that's not really my fault. You ask us to trust you and you have no idea what's going on yourself? I know what is going on outside my mind. But I have no effing clue the shit that's going on in there. That's more than a little concerning, you know? Shinso and Yamada watched as the two went back and forth, both equally exasperated and stubborn. Not a good combination. They really are alike. Yamada whispered to Shinso. Yeah. 500 yen says that Polaroid drinks a whole pot of coffee at once and has chronic insomnia. Shinso bet. 500 yen says that and he likes to take naps anywhere and everywhere. Yamada grinned at the boy. You have a bet? Shinso smirked. The two shook on it and continued to watch the sheet show in front of them. Seriously? What is up with you, Polaroid? You act like a child yet claim to be an adult. Tsukachi confirmed you were 23. How can you be a teenager and 23 at the same time? Aizawa argued. Suddenly Polaroid was crying. I have no FING clue and it is really scaring me. I have seen so much messed up shit. I had to hold my best friend's severed head in my hands as I watched every single person I love get killed. I lost everyone and everything and still I had to keep going. Now I'm broken and confused and scared because I need to fix it and no one else can help me because they don't remember. Polaroid's voice was shrill and panicked. They were all silent. Polaroid shot to the door, grabbed his shoes and ran. Leaving the door swinging and letting the cold evening air in. Midoriya could hardly wrap his mind around what had happened. He went home and did not patrol that night and just numbly lay in his bed and stared at the ceiling. He still had 4 months until he would be meeting All Might. And he had messed everything up so early on. Did he just kill his friends again? Did he mess everything up? He didn't know. And how he hated not knowing. Midoriya decided that he needed to distract himself. Thinking about all that would just do him more harm than good. Aizawa didn't know everything. The last thing anyone would expect is a technically teenage time traveler. The evidence was hardly there. It would be fine. For the month since he rescued Shinso, Midoriya had been preparing the next step of his plans. He had 4 months until All Might. 14 months until the exams. He could do this. He had to. Because if he didn't, his mind wouldn't survive it. Aizawa hadn't heard hide nor hair of Polaroid. No one had really. The boys still turned in criminals. But gone were the notes, the conversations over phone or comms, the meetups. All he sent was the locations Tsukachi or him, and that was it. No matter how much they tried to get him to talk to them, he didn't respond. Shinso didn't even feel his presence again. For a whole month there was minimal contact. And it was his fault. He shouldn't have gotten so frustrated. That argument between them had pushed Polaroid to reveal something obviously very personal and very painful. A teenager. A teenager had everything ripped away from him. A teenager had the light forced from his eyes and replaced with darkness and sorrow. A teenager now spoke in a painfully soft, sad voice. Even when happy, something had happened to Polaroid, to this kid, and it was not good. It was at times like these Aizawa was painfully aware the world was cruel. And it was at times like these he didn't regret becoming a hero in the slightest. Over the past month he and Tsukachi had been hard at work. They were trying to find Polaroid's identity and profile. But they were mainly looking for his quirk and trying to put together some sort of plausible story. They didn't have much. Just that he was 23, yet thought himself as a teenager enough to have a crisis over it. That he had curly green hair that was on the longer side, as noticed by Aizawa in the light of his home. That he liked music, was fluent in English, like old technology, and loved learning about quirks and studying them. That he most certainly had PTSD and likely anxiety and depression. Other than that, everything was guesswork. And with Polaroid shutting them out, they were not getting anywhere else. For now, they just had to mull over the theories they made. The most likely of theirs right now was that he had been hit by an especially powerful Deijin quirk that had a memory aspect. The next up running was that he was hit by a personality quirk and used a memory quirk to make them forget things. And that he either used it too much and caused them to forget everything or that it malfunctioned. After that was time travel. But it was unlikely. Every time quirk in existence was carefully monitored and none of them were ever powerful enough to send someone back that far. The most powerful one known being sending someone back 10 seconds. And even on trigger that person would likely only manage a minute. And even then, that wouldn't explain why Polaroid was a teenager again. So that one was put on the back burner. As they thought and theorized, there was one thing on their mind. What was Polaroid doing? Polaroid was currently scaling a building. Illegally. But that was to be expected when one was scaling an apartment building. An expensive apartment building. A month ago, Midoriya had decided to lay low. His next part of his plan did not require contact with heroes, and it would be best to stay away anyways. Better to avoid the heroes and thus any more reveals his stupid teenage brain supplied them. A month ago, he had also enacted the next part of his plan. Koda. Midoriya wished he had been sent back long enough to be able to save Koda's parents. But the heroes had been killed only weeks before the day he had been sent back. Talk about rotten luck. Koda had only just turned 5. Midoriya had found his apartment building back when he was still checking up with Shinso. But he had decided to hold off a bit. He had 2 reasons for this. The first was that he wanted to give Koda a bit more time to process things. It had been a while, but he knew firsthand just how bad grief can be and affect you. And with Koda being a child, it was much worse. So, he would give the boy a bit more time before stepping in. He loved his son and could only hope that he would be okay. Even if he wasn't exactly his son just yet. The second being was that he needed some time to prepare for step 3, which he would enact soon. And so, a month ago Midoriya had started sneaking into the apartment. Well, not into, just to the building. He knew where Koda's room was, and it just so happened to have a small balcony. Late into the night he snuck to the building and went to the balcony. There he left a little note. Said, "Dear Koda, you do not know who I am. But that does not matter yet. I know about the death of your parents. And I know that everyone is telling you they died a noble death. It was for a good cause. You should be proud of them. I know of your resentment towards heroes and villains alike. To quirks in general. I know you just wish that no one was fighting. That everyone could just live together in peace. That villains wouldn't ruin people's lives. That heroes wouldn't sacrifice themselves and die for the good cause. From one bitter, grieving person to another, I feel you. I feel your pain. I understand it. I know it feels like nothing can or ever will compared. And I am not comparing our suffering. But I too have lost many people to villains. I have seen my friends, my family, my comrades sacrifice themselves for the greater good. I too wish that there were no quirks, no heroes, no villains, no corruption, just peace. But I also know that that is a wish that will not be granted. Not without death and destruction first at least. Heroes are needed right now, and I hate that fact. But really, I just wanted to tell you that you are not alone. That there is at least one person out there who knows the pain and frustration and hatred you are feeling. You are an amazing, strong kid. And I believe that you can do anything you set your mind to. That you can change this future for the better. If you could keep these letters between us, that would be great. And I know this sounds shady as F-, but I think it would be better if no one knew about this just yet. I promise I'm not a villain. Feel free to leave another note. Or not, it's your choice. Midoriya left that heartfelt note poking out from under a rock he had set to weigh it down. He didn't know if Koda would respond, but he would make sure to check every night if he could. He didn't want Koda to respond and then miss it. In the end, it took 3 days for Koda to leave a note. It was written in a childish sprawl that was so endearing to him. Koda had always been so smart and knew how to write well for his age. As a 6-year-old, he could write better than many middle school students. And newly at the age of 5 as he was now, he could write just as well as your average 4th or 5th grader. When he got older, he had tested out of his literature classes and started writing novels on the side of school and was doing great. They had all been so proud of him. You are right, your note was shady as F-. But, thank you. At first, I wanted to hate you. I didn't like how you said you knew how I felt. But now I have decided that I am willing to try it out. At least to test you. See if you are legit. I still don't like you. But I'll give you a chance. Koda. P.S. I didn't tell anyone about you. But I will if I decide I don't like you. Thus started the letters sent between them. Midoriya started responding with casual things with a few personal tidbits mixed in. Kota responded with random things but was obviously guarded. Smart kid. And just the Kota he knew and loved. Every night without fail, they would leave letters. Sometimes Midoriya would draw little sketches of people he knew and tell stories about them. Then he would tell them how they died. Obviously, it was censored quite a bit and some was doctored to not include the future. But for the most part it was true. After these started, Kota opened up a bit more. He started talking about his parents and drawing cute little pictures of them and other things. Midoriya couldn't help but pin them up on a corkboard in his room. Midoriya talked about school. And Kota responded with his own stories. Apparently, Kota really liked how he scared the ever-loving Sheet out of his classmates and teachers, calling him badass and cool as F-. Midoriya would always send a playful language in his letters. Knowing full well it would not be heeded, Kota was just as bad as Bakugo with his language. A month passed and Midoriya was getting ready to enact part 3 of his plans. It was now that he decided that it was time to reveal himself to Kota. And he told him so in his last letter. He didn't like having the kid wake up at midnight to see him, but it was better than being caught by his aunt and company. Midoriya decided to go in his vigilante gear. He knew Kota would be angry, thinking he had lied, considering he had never mentioned his vigilantism. Over the past month he had been talking to Kota about heroes and villains. Kota had started reluctantly agreeing with him a bit. Not fully, but he was getting there. Midoriya needed to tell him before it was too late. And now was the best, if only, time to do it. So that chilly winter night he climbed the building and hopped onto the balcony. And was met by Kota. The two stared at each other in silence for a few moments. You said you weren't a hero or a villain. Kota angrily accused, quite suddenly. I'm neither. I'm technically a vigilante, but I can't even really be called that either. Midoriya replied just as suddenly. Kota continued to glare at him. But vigilantes are practically heroes doing illegal things like villain. Kota argued. Not really. I have not done a single illegal thing that the police could convict me of yet. They think I'm a vigilante, but I'm not and cannot be punished by the law. Midoriya countered. But how? At the moment, I am quirkless. I cannot be a vigilante since a vigilante is a person acting as a hero by using their quirk illegally. But I have no quirk and thus, I'm not a vigilante. I hate that you're right. But still, you lied to me. Midoriya sighed and slumped a bit. I kind of did. But I knew that you hated heroes and villains alike. And as a person in the middle, well, I didn't want to scare you off. I'm sorry. Midoriya explained a little guiltily. It was silent for a moment. What's your name? Kota asked, his glare softening. Oh, it's Polaroid. Midoriya answered, then he smirked. Though if you promise not to tell, I'll give you my real identity. And you'll be the very first outside my family to know. Kota looked indecisive for a moment. But then he nodded, a little suspicious. Midoriya grinned even wider, love swelled in his heart. He never thought he would get to see Kota so small again. He took his glasses and mask off. Then he crouched down to Kota's level and smiled at him. Midoriya, is Zuko at your service? He chirped. Kota couldn't help but smile and jump into his arms for a hug. Midoriya hugged him tight and could not stop a few tears from escaping his eyes. Kota was glad to finally be able to meet his savior. And while he would never admit it, that was who Midoriya was to him. This person he was hugging had helped him so much. And even his young mind could see that. But then again, he had always been mature for his age. And Midoriya, he treated him like he was mature. Not babied him like his family and everyone else did. When the two finally separated, Kota watched in confusion as Midoriya wiped a few tears from his face. Why are you crying? He asked. Midoriya let out a sad, bitter laugh. I'm just so happy to finally meet you, Kota. Believe it or not, you are a very bright light in my life and I care for you a lot. So, meeting you now is a blessing for me. In that moment Kota felt so loved. This love felt different from what the rest of his estranged family gave him. Their love was kind and sweet and soft. But Midoriya's love felt deep, a little sad, but so right. For a long time, They sat down with their legs hanging from the balcony and talked. Eventually Koda fell asleep and slumped into Midoriya's shoulder. With a loving smile, Midoriya went and tucked him back into a bed. He made sure to leave a note with a promise to come back. It was time for part 3. Midoriya knew what he was doing. He knew what was going to come from this. He knew exactly what he was getting into. He knew it. But he didn't like it. Actually, he hated it. He hated part 3 of his plan. Part 1 and 2 was easy. Part 1 was simply becoming a vigilante and saving Shinso. Part 2 was talking to Koda, the easiest so far. Part 3 was very hard. But he had to start it. This part was imperative to saving the future. And he would save the future. No matter how much he had to dirty his hands. Midoriya sighed deeply as he smoothed out his new outfit. Only he knew about this one. The outfit consisted of an old traditional black men's kimono with a pleated bottom. A black haori was placed over it. The haori was thin and delicate, easily blowing in the slight breeze in his room. He had white gloves that went all the way up his arms. He wore long thin white socks paired with dainty black dress shoes. A black mourning veil with lace trim hung over his head and gracefully flowed down his back and front. A white kitsune mask covered his whole face under the veil, hardly able to be seen under it. 2 katanas were strapped on either side of his hips. And a mini revolver was hidden in a secret pocket in his kimono, as well as some ammo of different calibers. Knives were hidden expertly in a similar fashion. Midoriya looked in the mirror and inhaled deeply. It was pitch black outside. He slowly let the breath out. Was he really going to do this? He took a deep breath. He had to. He let out the breath. Then he turned to the open window and left, grabbing his bouquet of flowers on his way out. Midoriya walked around for a bit. He knew where he was going. He had been researching for a long time. He was taking his time. He knew he had a whole month to do all that he needed to do. He was stalling. He knew that as well. He knew a lot of things. He just didn't know what to do with that sometimes. A bit later he was faced with a building. It was a bar deep into the red light district. And deep into villain territory. He looked at the building and deemed it the right one. It was a bar called Leap of Faith. Ironic. But just what he was looking for. Midoriya took in a shaking breath and pushed the door open. Everyone was silent as he walked in. Each step he took was graceful and smooth. Like he wasn't walking but gently gliding through the air. His long kimono, haori, and veil billowed behind him. A few petals fell from the bouquet he held in his hands. His light footsteps were the only thing that could be heard. He did not have to look around to find his objective. But for now he continued staring ahead, walking to the counter. With a single delicate movement he sat on a chair. 1 midnight rose, hold the vodka. Midoriya ordered. Due to the voice changer in his mask, his voice came out wispy and completely gender neutral. It was whimsical and melodic, but soft and smooth. Yes. The bartender nodded, turning to make the drink. The room tentatively went back to chatting and drinking. It didn't take long for his drink, which was luckily non-alcoholic at the moment, to come in. And by then the bar was at its full volume once more. Midoriya lifted his mask from under the veil to take a drink of his cocktail. It was good, though he knew most would argue that it would be better with the alcohol. Once he had taken a few drinks, he set the drink down. He took some time to scan the room. Perfect. He had gotten the date and time right. And luckily this looked like it would be pretty easy. Wonderful. Midoriya finished the last of his drink in one go. Then gently put his mask back down. Now it was time for the show. In one smooth motion he gave the bartender some money for his drink with one hand. The other hand secretly grabbed the gun within the folds of his kimono. Just as he had handed his money, he whipped around and clicked the barrel into place. Bang, bang, bang. Everyone was dead silent. And 3 men had bullet holes straight through their head. 3 dull thumps as each fell to the floor. The first was a villain called Alter, who had led to the death of many people he knew. And even at this moment, in this time, he had a very high kill count. The second was the villain Scratch. He inevitably became the Nomu after all, for one stole his quirk and killed him. He had a very powerful healing quirk and was a well-known serial killer. And third was the villain Muscular. Sometimes Midoriya wondered why less people used guns. Most quirks couldn't counter them. All he had to do was lace the bullets with some powerful quirk suppressants and he could kill most people. And that was just what he did. Not even Scratch and his healing quirk stood a chance. Not one word was said as Midoriya gracefully strolled to the 3 dead bodies. He hefted the bodies up and put them in a respectful position to make them look like they were resting. He might hate them, but he was respectful. He would be the better person here. Once they were settled, Midoriya folded their hands over their stomachs and stuck a single black rose from his bouquet in each of their hands. Then he closed their wide eyes, leaving a streak of red down their face. Midoriya straightened once he was done and turned from the bodies. He bowed to the shocked and frozen bar. "I am very sorry for the trouble," he muttered. Then he straightened once more and walked to the door. His once white gloves were stained red. Just like that terrible day he lost his family. The day he screamed among the cold corpses of his friends. Tsukachi had a headache. First he was working with Aizawa to try and contact Polaroid. But still with no avail. Then he heard about some new killer that had taken the underworld by a storm. Some bar that criminals obviously went to, but it's not like they could prove it and arrest them, called in. The shaky-sounding bartender explained that 3 people had been murdered by a mysterious villain. He, of course, was selected to go. He was called in the middle of the night, along with Aizawa, to check things out. Why did villains have to do everything so late into the night? It was annoying. He, some officers and Aizawa made their way to the bar. It had been cleared out for the most part and now only the bartender and a few regulars remained. The scene they got to was unexpected. They had expected a lot of blood, gore, and a mess. But instead there was a single bloody booth and no mess at all. The bodies had even been laid in the floor in a position most people would be put in their casket-like. A single bullet going right through their heads and embedding into one of the walls. There had been no fight. Just instant death. And in each of the dead's hands was a single, black rose. It was chilling. What happened? Tsukachi asked the bartender in a grave voice. They all closely listened as the bartender told the story, a few of the regulars adding something in every few sentences. I don't even know who they were," the bartender cried. "They just came in all elegant and order a midnight rose dash." The tender stopped as he thought about it. "That's their signature, isn't it?" he muttered. "A black rose?" The bartender sounded horrified and no one knew why this thought made him so scared. "Sir, why is that a bad thing?" Tsukachi asked. The bartender sighed and shook his head, running a tired hand down his face. "I know where I live, and I know we get a lot of shady people here. But I don't own this joint, I just work the night shift. You learn a lot about criminals and villains when you see them all the time. They have reasons for what they do. Even if that reason is just to cause chaos or because they find the sick things they do fun. But the ones that get far are the ones with true conviction. And most of these powerful villains have a trademark or a signature." They started to catch on to what the tender was saying. "I watched as this person killed some likely very powerful people in less than a second. Brains on the wall, dead in an instant. Like it was nothing. Then they lay the bodies in an orderly manner and leave a flower, bowing and apologizing for the intrusion before they just up and leave. They even paid for the drink they got. Do you know what a black rose symbolizes, detective?" Tsukachi shook his head, deeply disturbed that the man had yet to lie. Flowers have quite the significance in the underworld, mainly due to the amount of people who use flowers to leave a message. Black roses are hardly ever used due to their heavy and contradicting meanings. The black rose symbolizes sorrow, death, and mourning. But it also symbolizes hatred, revenge, and endings. This killer isn't just killing for the hell of it. And I quite frankly don't want to know why they did what they did. That's your problem now. Tsukachi had a distinctly bad feeling about this. A week later, Midoriya washed blood of his white gloves in the sink. A few days later and he did the same thing. And again. And again. The last time he had to wash blood off something, it was his whole body. Over the past month he had been killing villains. He had been dubbed the serial killer Rose. Likely due to always ordering a midnight rose at a bar and the black roses he would leave. He had killed a total of 14 villains. All irredeemable and too dangerous to let live. And with every kill he made, Midoriya felt a bit of himself break. Having to go out as a villain one night, then go out as a vigilante another was conflicting and left him feeling so very guilty. The cracks where he had so delicately been put back together were starting to come apart again. Every kill he made was like a tiny hit to the fragile jar. A small hit was enough to make him start to break again. And a small flick would be enough to shatter him again. And that small flick was his 15th kill. The person he was killing wasn't well known. But she was terrible. Her name was Queen Bee. But at the moment she was going by the name Honey. The heroes had thought she had been killed long ago. Aizawa had been on the case and even he had thought she was dead. All it took was a single bee to have it crumbling. In the future Queen Bee would kill hundreds of civilians in her human host. And she was the reason Aizawa was put in a coma. Aizawa had been badly injured by Shigaraki. But once the deranged villain got bored he left him to bleed out. Queen Bee was lucky to stumble upon him. Midoriya had seen her swarm him, injecting him with a slew of different poisons. Midoriya killed her. But it had been a hard battle considering he knew nothing of her. But now Midoriya was not going into the fight blind. He knew her weakness. He knew exactly what to do to kill her for real. It was supposed to be easy, but it was not. Midoriya walked into the bar like he always did. Every villain recognized him, but none dared to leave. They knew not to leave. On the 4th kill he made his target had tried to run with a few people. Midoriya shot his target in the head like everyone else. Word soon spread that anyone who left the building before Rose had finished their drink would be shot. It was a lie, of course. But Midoriya did not correct them. For them, it was like playing Russian roulette. At least one person was the victim. But you never know just who was. It could be you, your friend, or some random person in the room. All that mattered was that someone would be dead by the time the drink was finished. No one dared run. Midoriya walked into a bar as normal. Everyone was silent as he ordered his usual drink. The feeling of death loomed over them all. Midoriya sipped his drink slowly. The target was sitting right next to him. Honey, unlike everyone else, was calm. She was eyeing him with a single eye glittering with amusement and anticipation. Just by looking at her, Midoriya didn't think she would be the one with a rose in her hand. The way she scanned the room made it obvious that she was guessing which one would be killed. She didn't know that he knew. Midoriya was a few sips away from finishing his drink when he struck. Like a coiled snake he pounced. He slid a knife from his sleeve and brutally stabbed her in the eye. He had only ever used his gun. The katanas were there for show and use if needed. And the knives were a secret weapon of his. His guns were better to use. They were fast, efficient, and made him feel a little better. It made him feel more like the bullet killed them than him, despite being the one holding the gun. But now as he felt the squelch as he brutally brought the knife to its hilt in the woman's eye, he could only feel deep guilt and disgust. Queen Bee let out a blood-curdling scream. He took out his gun and flicked the safety off. His knife was modified by him to specifically keep all the bees from exiting the eye. He also knew that Queen Bee always kept her bees in her while eating. An odd habit that would be her end. He shot every single bullet he had straight into her head. But these bullets, they were special. Each one had a different function. The first was quirk suppressing. The next 3 had an electric shock that would kill the average person and creature. The 5th bullet had a cocktail of deadly poisons laced in it. The last bullet had a tiny explosive in it. In a second, Queen Bee had her quirk suppressed, was electrocuted to death, and had her head exploded. Bits of gore, skull, broken bees and brain matter splattered all over him and everything around him. A few people bent over and puked where they were. Midoriya took in a shuddering breath. And felt himself break. With shaking hands he did as he always did with the body. He took the whole bouquet this time and put it in her hands. Technically, he had taken the life of a civilian. Albeit one being possessed by an evil, cruel villainess. But a civilian nonetheless. He stood up and bowed again, bits of viscera and gore falling off of him as he did so. I am very sorry for the intrusion, he whispered in a broke voice that not even the voice changer could hide. Midoriya was just opening the door when he felt a hand on his shoulder. He froze, then looked back. Some random criminal with a cigarette in one hand looked back at him. Everyone else in the bar was looking at the man like he was crazy. And honestly, he kind of was. "Why are you doing this, kid?" he asked in a sad, gruff voice. Midoriya blinked in surprise. "Not that anyone saw." "I'm not." Midoriya tried to argue. "I know a kid when I see one. Heck, I have kids of my own." The man interjected, gaining him even more incredulous looks. "You can't be older than 13. Right on the spot, and the man didn't even know it. Midoriya didn't say anything. Then a single tear fell down his cheek and dropped to the floor. One made way to many. Midoriya slowly turned his head back to the door. "I am cursed with knowledge that no one else knows. I am cursed to know and see and experience so much, and have to be the one to bring change. I have seen horrors that no one could imagine." Midoriya's voice was sorrowful and so utterly broken. He clenched his hands over his heart and hung his head, shaking. "I have to fix this. And this is the safest way. I cannot afford to be innocent. For a true hero will bloody their hands to spare someone else from having to do so themselves." Midoriya fell to his knees, still clutching his heart and crying. "I was far past the point of return before I was Rose. So what is a few more lives to save a million? Hero and villain alike? Must I save them all? I didn't want this. I didn't want it to come to this. I didn't want it to come to this." Midoriya took a deep breath to calm himself and stood up on shaking legs. "I am the cursed hero. Hated by all, yet still holding up the world. And no one will ever know it. And it's better if no one ever does." Midoriya did not look back as he fled the bar. Midoriya ran all the way back home, running along the roofs. He made sure to avoid every hero route he could and be careful when in someone's route. As he ran, he used a special piece of equipment he had ordered off the black market. It was a cover to put on his feet that would make blood evaporate immediately wherever he stepped. It was cork-made, of course. So he would leave no trail of blood behind. He decided to go through the front door since he didn't have the energy to climb through the window like normal. His mother always went to bed early anyways and was a very deep sleeper. He should have noticed the lights on before he unlocked the door with bloody fingers. He should have remembered that the Bakugas were over for a game night as they started doing every other Friday. He fumbled open the door and stumbled in, closing the door. Behind him, his eyes widened in shock and horror as he saw Inko and the Bakugas looking at him in the same way. "Don't move. That is Rose." Mitsuki whispered. Midoriya looked at them like a deer caught in the headlights. "Why the F?" Bakugu choked, also knowing better than to move. He had mellowed out a lot and now knew when he was outmatched. Rose was known by almost everyone now. Everyone knew that if they saw Rose, someone was going to die. The public was warned to never confront him and to wait to call the police until he left. And to never, ever leave when Rose was around. Midoriya saw Inko reaching into her pocket where she kept her emergency distance taser. Midoriya had made her keep on her just in case. Midoriya slowly lifted the bloody veil, ignoring the bits of flesh that slid off it and onto the floor, and then took off his mask. His dull green eyes bored into the three of them. He cast the mask to the side and trudged to the bathroom, slamming the door shut. No one stopped him. For a whole hour and a half Midoriya sat under the hot, running water, scrubbing roughly at his skin until it was raw. But he couldn't get the feeling of blood and gore off his skin. He felt disgusting. He was disgusting. He eventually got out once the water started becoming cold. He didn't even bother washing his villain outfit. He had completely step 3. He didn't need it anymore. Not the whole thing at least. Once he got into some pajamas he always stashed in his bathroom, he went out. He grabbed a blanket from his bed and wrapped it around himself as he went. He shivered and scratched at his skin as he walked to the living room. He made his bed, now he had to lay in it. And he couldn't take being alone. He just couldn't. Being alone would leave him to his thoughts. To himself. To his disgusting self. He didn't know what he would do if he had to be alone. He would rather be hated than alone. Never alone. He shakily walked into the living room and collapsed on the couch, ignoring the horrified stares he was getting from the table. He wrapped the blanket around himself and curled up under it. No one missed the horrified look in his eyes. Midoriya shivered under the blanket and scratched. And scratched. And scratched. His arms started bleeding. He continued scratching. Now at least the phantom feeling of blood was real. At least it was his own. Then he felt two strong arms grab his wrists. He hadn't even noticed that the blanket had been taken off of him. He looked into crimson, blood, eyes. They were soft and filled with deep sadness. Bakugo gently sat down next to the shaking boy and wrapped him in a tight hug, making sure to keep his wrists captive somehow. Midoriya trembled and cried as he let the blonde hug him. I'm sorry. I had to. She will kill so many. I had to. Midoriya muttered. Bakugo hushed him, gently carting a hand through his green locks. I know you had to. It's not your fault. No. My fault. Midoriya whimpered. No, it's not. You did what you had to do. It's her fault for being bad in the first place. It's not your fault. Bakugo soothed to his best ability. But she was, Midoriya cried, not finding a valid argument against Bakugo's words. Izuku. Bakugo said sternly, grabbing the other boy's face with his hands and looking deep into his eyes, you did what had to be done. All those people deserved it. Every single person you got rid of was a murderer and a cruel villain. One that would have killed so many people. Because I know you wouldn't kill anyone that didn't need to die. Blame. Midoriya was silent for a moment. Then he let out a heart-wrenching wail and curled into Bakugo. Mitsuki, Masaru, and Inko too this time to join them in their hug. A family hugging a broken boy. Midoriya wasn't doing well, but all things considering it could have been worse. After that breakdown on the couch, he seemed to get a little better. He woke up the next morning and decided to be useful and make breakfast. The others had ended up staying the night and he felt bad about it. But then again, he felt bad about everything now. As he cooked, he couldn't help but get lost in his thoughts. Why was he always the one that had to break himself over and over again? It could have been anyone else. But here he was, the only one with the key to the future in his hands. Inko and the Bakugos were good allies. But no one would ever truly understand. No one understood the weight the world carried. If this was Greek mythology, he would be Atlas. Forced to carry the whole world as a punishment. Either let the earth fall and fall with it, or keep holding it up until the end of time and spare your own life for those small thoughts that you might get saved from your awful fate. Midoriya just wondered what he was being punished for. Maybe it was for letting his friends die? Maybe it was for being selfish and taking one for all for himself? He was starting to think it was a punishment for merely existing. But the question was, would he fall and let the world come crashing with him? Finally resting, but condemning the ones who remained behind? Or would he continue to hold up the world? Being mocked and hurt by the people he protects, them not knowing that he was the only thing between chaos and destruction. Was he a bad person for doing what was needed? He didn't know. Midoriya silently set the table as the quiet family, because that's what they were at this point, sat down. They looked surprised that he was up. And despite looking like a train wreck, he most certainly was. He had made pancakes for breakfast, like his father used to do before he left for America and was never heard from again. No one knew what happened to him. He just disappeared. And after a full 5 years of being missing, he was declared dead. By then Inko and Midoriya were over it. But they couldn't help the fond memories that came from the sweet American breakfast. No one said a word as he dished them up and clicked the television on to the news. They ate in silence, just the sound of the news playing behind them. Here is an exclusive story on the new serial killer Rose. A male reporter said. Midoriya froze. Then he grabbed the remote and turned it up. The other 3 in the room froze, not knowing just how Midoriya would react. Last night Rose made yet another kill. But this one was much different. Please note that viewer advising is recommended. Rose went to the bar Dust Bunny last night. They, being called they since their pronouns are unknown, ordered their usual drink. A midnight Rose, holding the vodka, making it non-alcoholic. It is well known that Rose will kill at least one person, the highest being 3 people, before or right after they finish their drink. And last night their unlucky victim happened to be sitting right next to them. The villainess known as Honey was brutally murdered. A blurry picture of Honey jumping at someone was shown on the screen. It was from a month ago when she had attacked some pro and nearly killed them. The cam the pro was wearing got the picture. Rose has always had a very special way of making their kills. It is always a bullet to the person's head, with the bullet always being laced with some kind of quirk suppressant. Police believe that this is so that any healing quirks can be counteracted. The deaths are always swift and ultimately painless. For the victim, Rose will then silently move the bodies to rest in a respectful position with little mess. Put a single black rose in their hands. Then bow and apologize to everyone in the bar before leaving, and their picture popped up. This time it was a photo of one of the crime scenes. It was of his 5th and 6th kills, done at the same time. The blood and gore were all blurred out. Midoriya looked at the television with a blank expression. Everyone else on the other hand looked slightly sick. Everyone knows not to leave the bar before Rose has killed someone. Due to the murder of the villain puppet Massacre, who tried to run with a few others and was killed. Right afterwards the villainous Venus, romantic partner of puppet Massacre, was killed in the same way as him. But this murder was different from all the others. Honey was found with her entire head gone. Inko dropped her fork and looked at the television in absolute horror. A picture had appeared, a heavily blurred picture of Honey. The spot where her head was supposed to be was blurred. In fact, most of the photo was blurred. It was all red. As you can see, this murder was bloody. According to witnesses, Honey seemed confident that she was not the target, and was looking around when Rose suddenly pounced and stabbed her in her left eye. They wrestled Honey to the floor and took out their gun, making 6 quick shots to the eye through the side. The last bullet apparently had an explosive as Honey's head completely exploded seconds after the last shot was fired. Just like always, Rose put the body in a respectful position. But instead of putting just one rose in her hands, Rose put the full bouquet. Rose then bowed and apologized for the intrusion. Witnesses say that they saw that Rose looked very shaken while doing all this. And just as Rose was leaving, one brave, or possibly foolhardy, man confronted Rose. The man and everyone else in the bar refused to tell what was said or what happened. But apparently Rose had a breakdown in the bar. What the people in the bar did say was that Rose called themselves the cursed hero. Here is an audio clip of the interview one of the people in the bar had to say to the police. Rose said, word for word, "I cannot afford to be innocent. For a true hero will bloody their hands to spare someone else from having to do so themselves. And I can say with confidence that I ain't gonna be forgettin' that anytime soon." A man with a rough voice said. Then the guy started screaming about how he didn't want this. That they was killing a few to save the lives of millions. Then they called themselves the cursed hero. But other than that, I ain't saying nothing. Because I 100% believe what Rose said about themselves was true. They ain't going to kill no more people. And any kill they made was of some villain who deserved it. I don't know what Rose knows, but as much as I hate villains, I trust this one to know their stuff. All other interviews went in the same manner. But what the police has gathered is that Rose had a specific reason for killing these villains. The public is divided on what to think. Is this Rose really a villain? Or are they just a cursed hero as they claim to be? We'll have to wait and see. The news went on to cover a different story. The 4 people in the room looked over to the 5th. Midoriya was staring at the television with a blank face. Then he sighed and rested his head in his hands, shaking his head. I am a terrible person. Midoriya warbled, I am a terrible person, but I'm trying my goddamn best. I had to kill her so brutally because that wasn't the villainous Honey, that was Queen Bee, who had been alive for over 100 years. Midoriya looked up at all of them with tired, tear-filled eyes. Let's just say that in order to kill her you need to completely destroy her. Honey was just some civilian she possessed. Being possessed by Queen Bee is a death sentence. Only one host has ever been saved and it was a complete miracle. They thought that Queen Bee was dead, but she wasn't. And we didn't find out until it was too late and put Dad in a coma. Midoriya looked up at all of them with pleading eyes. Please tell me I'm not a terrible person. Please. Because I don't want to be bad. But sometimes you can't save people. Inko got out of her seat and marched over to her son. Then she wrapped him into a tight hug. Midoriya sobbed into her shoulder. Baby, you are a wonderful, kind, empathetic person. If you were bad, you wouldn't feel remorse for killing someone who absolutely deserved it? Inko said fiercely, I have told you many times. I trust you. I just wish you had told us instead of handling this all on your own. The Bakugas decided to quietly excuse themselves and let the mother and son deal with it. They needed some time alone. Tsukachi was in shock. He had gotten done with all the interviews last night for the last Rose murder. And what he heard was chilling. And then, 2 days later, someone came in with more information. It was one of the guys he had already interviewed. The man who had confronted Rose. Somehow, what he said put Tsukachi into an even deeper shock. Rose was just a child. Hardly even a teenager if what the man said was correct. An allegedly 13-year-old kid had murdered 15 villains. Then proceeded to have a mental breakdown over what he had done. The guilt had already been eating Rose up, and this was the nail in the coffin for them. The man had told him everything that had happened that night. Though he had made Tsukachi promise that the media would not get wind of it. Tsukachi promised to do his best, and the man spoke. Now, Tsukachi had no idea what to do. This child had to have had a reason for what he did. Was it revenge? Or was it something deeper than that? And what did a child know that apparently no one else in the world knew? Tsukachi ended up calling a meeting with everyone on the case. This consisted of some higher-ranking officers and few pro-heroes, including Eraserhead, Midnight, Night Eye, Fat Gum and 13. They all met in a bland meeting room, only decorated by a single plant and a table with a coffee machine, tea, and some cups and creamers. The table and chairs in the middle of the room was just as bland as the rest of the room. The heroes and officers all silently sat around the table, processing. Tsukachi had just played the recording of his newest, most enlightening interview. They had all thought they could not become any more shocked and confounded by the case before them. And yet here they were. Night Eye was the palest of them all. He suddenly stood up, his chair clattering to the floor. A future quirk. Night Eye whispered, he has a future quirk. Everyone's eyes widened as that sunk in. It makes so much sense. Midnight muttered, the kid can see the future, and doesn't like what he sees. So, he tries to change it in the best way possible. Those people must have something to do with the future he saw. If this is truly the case, Aizawa added, I don't think he ever wanted to murder them. Hence why he was as respectful to them as he could. We aren't dealing with a hardened criminal, we are dealing with a scared child. Tsukachi said numbly. No one could say anything to that. Over that past week Midoriya had been recuperating. He slept all during school, only waking for quizzes and tests when needed. He had a hard time eating, but someone always forced him to choke down some food. But everything tasted like cardboard. Went out as Polaroid a few times, but he still avoided anyone he could. Tsukachi and Aizawa were obviously very worried if their text messages had anything to say. Maybe he would talk to them again soon. Just not right now. It was the 7th day since the murder of Queen Bee when his mother confronted him. She sat them both on the couch and she gave him a determined stare. Izuku, I have let this go on long enough. Inko told him sternly, you need a therapist? Midoriya blinked and tilted his head. Why do I need one? I've been worse. Midoriya asked. Inko gave her son a deadpan look. Izuku. You might have been worse before, but that doesn't make you better. You are getting a therapist and that's final. Okay. Midoriya relented, putting his hands up in surrender. I'm not opposed to the idea. But I'm just surprised that we're doing this now of all times. Inko sighed and put her hands gently on his shoulders, looking deep into his eyes. As I said, this should have been done the second you traveled back here. But I was worried you would take it bad, so I didn't say anything. But now I see truly how hard it has been for you. And I know you need help. You don't even have to tell them everything. Just go. I want you to be happy, Izuku, and this will help you get there. Midoriya smiled lovingly at his mother. He really should have expected this. But maybe it was for the best. Midoriya was still a little confused as to why his mother wanted him to go to therapy. Sure, he had gone for quiet a few years back in his time. But he hadn't been to one since he was 20. And since he had recently turned 14, that was 4 years ago. Sure, he hadn't dealt with everything that well, But it's not like his therapist could have changed that. So, he was confused. But it was fine. He thought it was a waste of time. But there was nothing wrong with it. The day after the talk they had, Inko brought him forms to sign. She had that same determined she had had on the night before. She reminded him a bit of how Uraraka could get sometimes. She was very competitive. He went through everything, hardly skimming, rusting his mother that everything was fine. He was about to sign his name when he saw the name of the place he would be going to. Fujiya Mental Hospital. Midoriya looked up at his mother. This is a mental hospital. Not some therapist place. He accused, narrowing his eyes. Inko blushed a bit and at least looked bad. What? They do therapy as well. It's not just a psyche ward. Inko explained. Midoriya gave her a deadpan look. I personally ended up having this place shut down. Todoroki Ray goes there at the moment. Endeavor is paying them to stay quiet when she doesn't need to be there at this point. She got over her mania a few months after being admitted. She could have been out of there years ago. This place is shady as F-Mom. Inko looked a little cowed. I know, she said, and that's why I thought it would be perfect. Not everyone there is bad. And they can stay quiet about things. And you can investigate and help the people in there while you're at it. Midoriya had to admit she had a point. But for good measure he took an hour to carefully scan the documents. He didn't feel like selling his soul today. Luckily, there was nothing out of the normal. So, he signed and gave the papers to his mother. It would be another week until the papers would process and he would go in for his first appointment. Apparently his mother was having him go twice a week at least. Midoriya went along with his school. He wasn't planning on going out as Polaroid for a bit. But when he kept getting plagued by rose and blood-filled nightmares, he decided that being awake was better than sleeping. So, he went out as Polaroid and started taking down criminals again. He decided that now was as good of a time as ever to get back into contact after practically none for a little over 2 months. This is Polaroid. Midoriya sighed over the comms, sounding very tired. Thought I'd tell you that no, I'm not dead. And that there is big gang fight on XXXX that I can't take on alone. Hurry. There were some disbelieving responses, but promises to come quickly. They ended up doing just that and came in a jiffy. Okay, Midoriya had not been expecting this. Maybe 1 or 2 would come by to help. Not every underground hero on patrol nearby. When they tied up the criminals in record time, they all ran up to him. Midoriya panicked a bit, not liking the memories that came with the rush. He jumped and scrabbled up the building next to him with his sharp claws and hissed at them, bristling. The heroes looked up at him curiously as he hissed and spat at them. Are you sure he doesn't have a cat quirk eraser? Some pro asked. Midoriya stopped and gazed at the man talking incredulously. I am not a cat. Midoriya squawked indignantly. A furry then? Someone else smirked. No, Midoriya deadpanned. Then why did you dash? Someone else started. It's the PTSD you a-hole. Midoriya stopped them. They were silent. You need their dash. But I'm already getting it. So shut. Midoriya stopped someone once more. He slid down the wall, not bothered by the nails on chalkboard sound. Everyone else, even the tied-up criminals, winced at the noise. Midoriya landed on the ground and brushed himself off. Not dead. I'm also going to be a little less active. Unlike you poor guys, I have an infinitely flexible working schedule. Midoriya informed them. They could not ignore how tired his voice sounded. How weary. They had heard hints of it before. But now he wasn't even bothering hiding it. Kid, Aizawa slowly started. What? Midoriya snapped, still salty about the whole argument they had. I'm sorry for yelling at you last time. He apologized, catching Midoriya by slight surprise. You are welcome over any time to see Hitoshi. He actually really wants to see you again, as does my husband and the cats. And if that didn't make Midoriya's heart flutter, nothing else did. But years of practice let him hide his blush, and he shrugged. That's good. We'll see. I'm going to be really busy with a whole lot of things. Midoriya reluctantly forgave. Aizawa smiled softly, making all the other underground heroes back off in shock. That's good, kid. I'm not a Midoriya tried, but he found himself unable to argue it. F-. I don't know what happened to make that so complicated, but take your time. Aizawa placated. That's chill. Midoriya awkwardly coughed. Say hi to Nao-Nao-chan for me. I'll make sure to do that. Aizawa grinned. Midoriya gave them a small smile and salute before hopping off. No one followed him. Midoriya ended up visiting Koda after that. He and the boy were quite close. He didn't go in his Polaroid outfit. Instead he wore black jeans, an oversized black sweater, and his combat boots. Over his face was a black medical mask and circular rose-colored glasses just like his Polaroid ones. And of course, he had his clawed gloves on. He scaled the wall and hopped onto the balcony. Koda was reading a book under his covers. Midoriya grinned and snuck silently into the room. Koda did not move as he crept forward. Once he got to the bed, he crouched down and grabbed the blanket. "Boo," he whispered as he popped his head under the blanket to look at the boy. Koda startled and nearly screamed, but Midoriya brought a finger to his lips and he stayed silent. "Fu, you didn't scare me." Koda stuttered. Midoriya snickered. Sure. Midoriya grinned, getting back up. Koda crawled from under his blankets and slipped his slippers on. The two walked to the balcony where they would talk. Midoriya made sure to snag a large blanket while they were at it. It was cold out there. They sat down next to each other and Midoriya pulled the blanket over the both of them. They talked about random stuff as usual. Just talking about their days. "My aunts and uncle have been really worried about this serial killer person. Rose, I think?" Koda said at some point. Midoriya went pale, but in the night, it was unnoticeable. Rose only killed villains. They killed the guy who killed my parents? Koda looked down at his lap. Rose is a bad guy, a villain, but what if they are my hero too? Like you are? Is that a bad thing? They were silent. Then Midoriya gently wrapped the boy in a half-hug and pulled him close. Koda swiveled to bury his face in Midoriya's chest. "Koda, not all people who are villains are bad. Some aren't even villains, it's just that people see them as a villain." "Rose, gosh, this is hard." Midoriya sighed and took a moment to weigh his options. "Let me ask you this. If Rose was killing those people so that other people wouldn't get hurt, would you still call him a villain?" Koda looked up at him with wide eyes. Then he shook his head. "No. I remember one time Auntie Mandalay had to kill a villain because they were hurting lots of people. She was sad, but she isn't a villain. So, if Rose was doing the same thing, why would they be a villain?" It was at moments like these that Midoriya remembered how smart Koda was for his age. He smiled down at Koda and ruffled his hair. "There's your answer. Rose didn't like killing those people. That's why he always treated their bodies as nice as he could. He didn't want to kill them. But he thought it was better to kill them than have the people he loved and many others get killed." Koda narrowed his eyes. Midoriya had a feeling he messed up, but didn't know what it was. "How did you know Rose is a boy?" Koda asked suspiciously. Midoriya blanched. "I think it's best if you don't know. Not until you're older at least." Midoriya told him awkwardly. Koda stood up and glared down at him. "Tell me," Koda demanded. Koda dash. "Tell me or I'll tell Auntie about you." Midoriya went silent, knowing full well that wasn't just a threat. Midoriya sighed and got up. "I have something for you. I trust you to keep this safe and only use it in an emergency," Midoriya told Koda solemnly. Then he delicately pulled a sheath knife. It was a small, delicate knife, and very special. The hilt was black wood with roses carefully carved into it with white painted over the carved ridges. A white 2 in Roman numerals was painted on the wood. The sheath that covered the knife was a simple black cloth with red flowers on it. He took the knife out. The blade itself was razor sharp and serrated on one bit. The metal was black and when in the light had a red hue. Midoriya showed the boy the knife before clipping it back into the sheath. He handed the small knife to the boy, who took it and looked down at it in confusion. Midoriya gently closed the boy's hands over the weapon. "This is your answer. You'll understand soon enough. Like I said, only use it in emergencies and hide it well. Most people won't trust a kid with a knife. But you're smart and mature, so I trust you." Midoriya crouched down once more and pulled Koda into one last, loving hug. Then he let go of the boy and got back up, heading to the edge of the balcony. "I'm going to be gone for a while. I don't know how long, but I'll be back. I promise. I love you, Koda." Midoriya sadly told the boy. Koda dropped the knife and ran forward. Wait, she cried. But Midoriya was gone. The next morning Koda woke up, the knife clenched tight in his hands. He looked down at the knife with a tearful gaze. His Aunt Ragdoll came in with a smile. Koda slid the knife under his pillow. Ragdoll saw his tears immediately and frowned, running over to his bed. Hey kitten, what's wrong? She asked. Bad dream. About it. Koda lied. Ragdoll's eyes went soft and she nodded. Oh kitten, do you want to talk about it? Or just go down for breakfast? Breakfast? Koda mumbled, getting out of bed careful not to move his pillow too much. He would find a better place to hide the weapon later. He followed his aunt after drying his tears and went down to eat breakfast. The news was on in the background. He ate his cereal and thought about the night before. Deku trusted him enough to give him a weapon, something likely very important to him if the way he handled it had anything to do with it. He had said it was the answer, and that he would find out soon enough. But what did the knife have to do with Rose? And what did Deku have to do with Rose? Breaking news. The case on the serial killer villain Rose has gotten more interesting. It seems that a knife from the last murder was found on a detective's desk with a note from Rose themselves last night. The note was not released to the public, but we do know that there are 3 knives in the set, all identical to one another minus a number on the hilt. Koda's head snapped up and he looked at the television. He missed the concerned gazes his family sent him. Here is the picture of the knife and its sheath. If you find any of these knives, please take it to the police immediately. Koda's eyes widened even further when a picture of a very familiar knife. Everything was the same. To the sheath, the wood, the metal, and the shape. All except for 3 little strokes of a brush. A number 1 in Roman numerals. Someone turned the television to a new news channel. Koda forced himself to look back at his cereal and continue eating. Though it was more like choking it down at this point. He couldn't believe it. Rose was... Koda, are you okay kitten? Mandalay asked, knowing something was wrong. Koda flinched. She frowned and pulled a chair next to him. Sweetie, what's she tried again, but Koda slammed his spoon on the table and glared at her. Then he remembered what Deku had told him a few visits ago. They just care about you, Koda. I know you don't like their care, and I know they don't fully understand. But you have to remember that they lost someone they love too. Give them a chance. Talk to them. You can talk to me anytime, but I also want you to try trusting them too. Koda softened his glare and looked back down. Then he sniffled and started crying. The small family of all but blood took seats around him, ready to listen if he felt like talking. Is it wrong that Rose is my hero? Koda cried, wiping at his eyes in vain. They stopped V-villains from hurting people. And what if he didn't want to do it? The R reporters say that he was nice to the people he killed. Muscular can't hurt me anymore. Ever since Rose killed him, I haven't had nightmares about him or gotten scared. And Koda fell into heavy sobs. The adults all gathered around the boy and hugged him. Oh Koda, I can't decide who is a hero or a villain to you. Mandalay whispered, whatever you choose is right, believe in for you. Just be careful with who you trust, honey. That's all I can say. Koda sniffled and nodded. Be careful who you trust. Yeah, he trusted his Deku. Even if he was Rose. Inko and Midoriya walked into the hospital. Midoriya was jittery as he looked around. The mental hospital was small, but nice. It lacked the aura of death that surrounded normal hospitals. But it had something worse. He had a creeping feeling that something was off about this place. He had already gotten that feeling before knowing all that happened here. But now that he knew, this place had a very bad vibe. He wished he could remember which doctors were good. He distinctly remembered that a little over half of the doctors here had been innocent, completely unaware of what was going on or threatened into silence. The rest of them were corrupt, evil people. And overall, the management was evil. Midoriya had told his mother some of what happened here. But not all. It would be smart to gather evidence. He would just have to be careful not to make himself look too crazy. Which should be easy since he wasn't crazy. And maybe if he did this now, he could get Rei out of there faster. She didn't deserve this. And if she stayed here, in his past/future, Rei had died. And it was all because she was in this med hospital. When the war started and Shigaraki made his first attack that killed Class 1A, the villains deep-seated in the hospital had ended up killing everyone in the building who was not a villain or a patient who wasn't willing or crazy enough to become a villain themselves. And they had started with Rei Todoroki. In the end, all the villains and criminals had been caught. But by then, it was too late for 3/4 of the hospital. They had all lost people that day. Midoriya was just happy that in the end, Fuyumi and Natsuo survived. And now he was walking through the very same hospital. God, he hated this. Inko didn't look nervous in the slightest and was admiring how nice the place was. Oh Izuku, look at the garden on the roof. Inko smiled. It's above the psych ward but it's still pretty. Inko enthused. Midoriya nodded and gulped, still nervous. Every time a doctor passed he shivered deeply. More memories. Memories he had buried deep down into himself. From when? He wasn't thinking about that. Not today. Not ever if he could help it. Those things were better left alone. Midoriya sighed as he watched his mother point things out, trying to get him to like the place a bit more. He kind of wished he had told her now. Oh well, she wouldn't have let him come if she had truly known. Remembering something, he got his phone out and twiddled with it. He had bought and stuck a fisheye lens camera onto his shirt. He let it start recording. Once he was sure it was going, he put his phone away, careful to close the app before turning it off. Oh, we're here, Izuku. Mrs. Cassidy, she must be American? Inko hummed. She was excited for her son, happy that he can finally be happy. Midoriya gave her a strained smile and they walked in. They wouldn't know the mistake they made until much later. Midoriya decided that his therapist was one of the good ones. He used to be naive and thought the best of everyone when he was young. Before he faced tragedy and sorrow and betrayal. Now he knew better. Ends up he was an amazing judge of character when he wasn't trying to think the best of everyone. The first session where he met with Cassidy was awkward, much to Inko's dismay. Ends up Cassidy was American but moved to Japan when she was 7. She was a younger lady and had only just turned 30. She had long maroon curly hair that was thick and went all the way down to her hips. Her pale skin was covered in freckles and small scars littered here and there. Thick red cat eye glasses rested on her nose in front of vibrant pink eyes with slightly slit pupils. The first session was mainly just an easy get-to-know-you talk. She pretty much told them what to expect and told them about herself. Inko was glad to speak when it was her turn. She happily chatted about the things she liked to do. Knitting, reading, cooking, etc. Or just about her job. But once it was Midoriya's turn it was much more stilted. He did not trust her just yet. Even though at first glance she seemed good. He mainly just mumbled about liking to draw, exercise, read, and clean around the house. Yes, cleaning around the house was one of his favorite things to do. It was calm. Sue him. He hardly gave any details or talked about himself. The most information he gave her was that he liked cats and would go out at night to feed the strays. And that was it. They eventually left. Inko knew better than to push Midoriya, but she couldn't help but feel a little annoyed at how rude he was. But she didn't say anything. Midoriya could see her slight annoyance and ignored it. He was just glad she said nothing of it. The next time he went in it was alone, as most visits would be going. This actually made him feel a little better since that meant his mother was out of the danger zone if something were to happen. He still hated the place though. Most of the session with Cassidy consisted of him mumbling half-hearted responses while he was curled up on the couch, his legs and arms nestling under him like a cat. He did try though. But it was hard with all his distrust. The next session went a little better. Maybe this was because Midoriya had realized that Cassidy did not exude a bad aura. She felt calm and nice. And not at all fake. He also learned that her quirk only allowed her to see someone's current emotions by the color their aura had. Which was just a slight coloring around someone's figure. He opened up a little bit more. For some reason his mother started making him go 3 times a week, so he begrudgingly did. With each session that passed, he opened up a bit more. It was at his 8th session, 3 weeks in, he had his first panic attack. He and Cassidy were chatter about whatever like normal, and something that sounded like gunshots rang through the building. Then people started wailing and screaming. Later he would learn that one of the worst mental patients had used their quirk, which allowed them to make random, loud noises, and scared a lot of people into thinking it was a shooting. All the doctors knew what had happened due to someone messaging them fast, but no one else did. When Midoriya heard the gunshots, then the subsequent wailing and screaming, he was brought back to a time he would much rather forget. He was on a battlefield filled with bodies of heroes and villains alike. At his feet were the dead bodies of Himiko, Toga, and Compress. He hadn't meant to kill them. But the smoking gun in his hand was Dming. He hadn't heard them coming until it was too late. They snuck up on him and pounced. Danger sense flared fast. And before he could think his gun was out and there were 2 bullet holes through their heads, similar expressions of shock forever frozen on their faces. Oh God, he hadn't meant to kill them. He hadn't meant to. He wanted to save them, not kill them. But it was too late. And now they were dead because of a single, split-second reaction. Midoriya was unaware of the flashback he was in. In that moment, all he could see was the smoking gun in his hands and feel the blood that had splattered onto his hero costume. Midoriya dropped the gun, covered his ears, and screamed. He didn't want to hear the screams, the wails of those mourning the dead. He didn't want to smell the nauseating smell of blood and rotting remains. He didn't want to see the dead, to feel the blood. He furiously scratched at his arms. Over and over again. He didn't want to feel the blood. He didn't want to. He didn't want to. He didn't want to. Then suddenly 2 firm hands were grabbing his wrists and pulling them from his bleeding arms. One of the hands brought his own hand to his chest and one finger started tapping against his chest in a steady beat. Over and over. And over and over again. The pressure on his wrists and the rhythmic tapping on his chest started pulling him back. But he dared not open his eyes. Just in case. The feeling of blood started to slowly fade away. It was replaced with soft cloth and gentle hands. The smell of blood and decay turned into lavender perfume. The screams were gone and replaced with someone humming a soft tune. He slowly opened his eyes. Tears dripped down his face as he sobbed in relief. He wasn't there anymore. He wasn't there. Instead, he was in the little room and Cassidy was looking down at him. At some point he must have fallen to the floor because he was looking up at the ceiling and his therapist's face. His head was resting in her lap and each hand still had a tight grip on his wrists. His arms had deep scratches running down them and his nails had skin flaked under them. You back with me, honey? Cassidy smiled sadly. Midoriya shivered and nodded. Why, I'm not there. I'm not there. Midoriya whispered hoarsely. Cassidy nodded and let go of his wrists, which fell limp at his sides. Don't worry. That was just one of our more troubled people using their quirk. The nurse must have forgotten to check if she had her quirk suppressing pills. Cassidy calmly explained. Midoriya shakily nodded. He shivered and thought back to the flashback he had. He brought his hands up to scratch again, but Cassidy firmly took his hands again. He blinked, not even realizing that he was doing that. Oh, sorry. Midoriya stammered, looking at his slightly bloody hands. He felt nauseous. He hadn't had a panic attack that bad in a while. And it was always when he was alone. You shouldn't scratch yourself. That's bad for you. Let me get you patched up and we'll call you Mom. Okay? Cassidy said calmly, though her voice had a hint of sadness. Oh, he whispered. Cassidy nodded and grabbed some bandages, letting him go back to the couch. She sat next to him and started cleaning the scratches with a gentle hand. They said nothing to each other as she cleaned and bandaged his arms. When she was done, she looked deep into his wary eyes. Do you want to talk about it? About where you were? Cassidy softly asked. Midoriya trusted her in whole at that moment. I was back in the battlefield. Midoriya whispered, looking off into the distance in a slight daze. I was back in my costume, back in my time. Villains and heroes alike fallen in the battlefield. All you could smell was metallic blood, smoke, and decaying flesh. We had been fighting for 2 days straight with hardly any rest. I was jittery and running on adrenaline at that point. I was on edge. He missed the way Cassidy's eyes widened. 2 villains I knew well, Toga and Mr. Compress, sneaked up on me. Danger sense warned me they were coming and I reacted before my mind could think. I pulled my gun and shot them. In the head. 2 bullets was all it took. And they were dead. Midoriya turned his head to look at her with horror-filled eyes. I didn't want to kill them. I wanted to save them. From themselves. But I shot them. I killed them. The guns smoked and their blood splattered all over me. I couldn't get the feeling of their blood off me for days after the battle ended. No matter how much I scrubbed and scratched, the stickiness of the blood would never go away. Midoriya started tremoring and Cassidy swallowed her confusion and horror to pull him into a tight hug. I'm sorry, child. I'm so sorry, she whispered. Midoriya reluctantly wrapped his shaking arms around her and squeezed back. Neither moved for a while. Midoriya pulled away and Cassidy followed. Midoriya had a hold of himself now and took a deep, calming breath. Then he looked her straight in the eyes with a hard expression. You cannot tell anyone. I need to fix things this time around. Or the world will fall. Midoriya told her seriously. Cassidy nodded and made a motion of sealing her lips shut. Midoriya nodded, not detecting a hint of lie in her eyes. When Inko came to pick him up, Cassidy shut the door behind them and in a hushed voice told Inko what had happened. Inko was horrified, but glad that Cassidy was in on it. If just so her son would get actual help and that they would have one more person on their side. Cassidy asked them to come in together for the next session. They went home after that. Inko and Midoriya decided to take a break and just curl up on the couch and watch old pre-Quirk-era superhero movies. Midoriya had always particularly liked Spider-Man. Koda sat on his bed, looking down at the knife in his hands. It was late at night, the time he and Deku would talk. But he wasn't here tonight. Just as he hadn't been for the past 3 weeks. He knew his Deku had said he would be gone for a while. But Koda really missed him. He had so many questions for him too. Why did he become Rose? He had said that he was protecting his loved ones. But what else? Why did he become a vigilante? Koda still hadn't gotten an answer for that one. And finally, why was he so important? Why would Deku gain an interest in him? Why would he find some random child and decide to help him? But. So many questions. He would have to ask Dad when he came back. Dad. Inko and Midoriya walked into Cassidy's cute little room. They sat down on the couch across from her and they started the session. And Cassidy pulled no punches. I have diagnosed your son with severe depression, anxiety, PTSD, insomnia, and acute stress disorder, ASD. Cassidy started off. Inko and Midoriya both blanched. I'm not sure if Midoriya tried to argue. But Cassidy gave him a deadpan look that shut him up. Everything I said is true and you know it. She told him sternly, remember how I can see your emotions? Well, the first few sessions were full of distrust and anxiety and laced with self-loathing. Then when you started opening up to me more, I could easily tell that you were depressed. And with you telling me about your problems with nightmares and odd sleeping schedule, that one session I could tell you had insomnia. But I was waiting until you fully trusted me to say anything. But what about the ASD? Midoriya countered, that seems a little extreme. Not any more extreme than the PTSD which you have yet to mention? Cassidy remarked coolly. Midoriya opened his mouth to protest but couldn't. So he snapped it shut. You show all the symptoms for these, Midoriya, and I think it would be good to put you on some medication, Cassidy said firmly. Midoriya recoiled and hissed at her, like she had just struck him. Inko and Cassidy jumped and looked at him in concern. I don't do medication. Midoriya growled at them, distrust and anger in his eyes. Cassidy saw something that made her blanch a bit. Midoriya, have you had any bad experiences with medication in the past? Cassidy gently asked. Midoriya continued looking at Cassidy like she was a tarantula for a bit. Then he slowly settled back down, still distrustful but no longer angry. He looked down and slowly nodded. Inko had not known about this and frowned deeply. Cassidy matched her expression. Can you tell us, No. Midoriya whimpered, covering his ears and curling into a ball. He wasn't going to think about it. He wasn't. He scratched harshly at his arms, dragging his nails up and down them. His nails had always been a little sharp. It was a habit to make them sharper after he was able to escape an attempted kidnapping by using his sharp nails. So, the nails tore into his skin easily. Suddenly someone was grabbing his wrists and holding them close to someone's chest. They were breathing heavily and steadily. "Breath with me, Midoriya," a voice commanded. Midoriya shivered and did as he was told. When had he started to breath so fast? He hadn't realized how little breath he had been getting until he was suddenly able to breathe again. He opened his eyes. He looked and saw that he was in the embrace of his grave-looking mother, and Cassidy was the one holding his hands. His eyes widened when he saw that he had scratched himself again, his sharp nails even cutting through the remaining bandages he had from 2 days ago. Oh God, when had he started doing that? "Are you okay, Izuku?" Inko asked gently. Midoriya took a shaky breath and nodded. Tears streamed down his face and he sniffled. I don't want to think about it." Midoriya muttered, "I'm not going to think about it. It's too much." "That's okay. You don't need to take any medication if you don't want to. Though I would really like if you did." "No," Midoriya said, and that was final. After a few minutes in a tight embrace and Cassidy gently wrapping his arms, he noticed with slight annoyance that at all times someone had a hold on his wrist or hand. They didn't trust him not to hurt himself. Midoriya felt a little offended by this but said nothing. He had forgotten that Cassidy could see emotions. She chuckled a bit as she finished up his second arm. "Annoyed, are we?" She smiled. "I know it's annoying that we don't fully trust you not to scratch yourself. But it's better we keep a hold of you and not let you hurt yourself than take any risks. You have oddly sharp nails." Midoriya huffed and rolled his eyes a bit, back to normal for the most part. "I keep them that way. A few years ago, someone tried to kidnap me and I only managed to get out because Shinso had pranked me by sharpening my nails, like a cat's, he said. So, by keeping my nails long and a little sharp, I have a weapon that no one can get me legally for. And Shinso said they made me look cute in a scary way." Midoriya explained. Cassidy and Inko raised an eyebrow. Midoriya blushed and looked away from them indignantly. "Stop looking at me like that," he huffed. Cassidy and Inko laughed, finally letting him go. Midoriya sighed and looked down at his bandaged arms. He really had done a number on them. The scratches and cuts went all the way up his arm. "Since you don't want medication, have you ever considered a support animal?" Cassidy asked a little out of the blue. Midoriya's head snapped up to her. "A support animal? I thought those were only for people with physical disabilities?" Midoriya asked, Inko mirroring his confused look. Cassidy shook her head and smiled. "Nope. There are animals trained to help people through panic or anxiety attacks. They can even be trained to help someone avoid triggers, stressful situations, or anything else that might harm the person. Some can also grab water and food when someone feels as though they don't want to move or are too scared to. That, and animals have been shown to really help with someone's emotions and stress levels," Cassidy explained. Midoriya looked to his mother, who was looking at Cassidy like she was a genius. "What animals can you get?" she asked. Cassidy smiled, knowing she likely had just sold Inko on her suggestion. "Dogs and cats mainly. But people have chosen monkeys, birds, and ferrets before," she answered. Midoriya perked up at he word cats. "I can have a cat?" he asked, his eyes lit up with childlike excitement. Cassidy and Inko both chuckled. "You could, though they might have a harder time grabbing things. So, they would be more for helping with stress and such." "I don't care. I just want a cat." Midoriya grinned. Both adults gave each other a fond look and snorted. It was common knowledge that Midoriya adored cats. "Well, if you come by tomorrow, we can have you pick out one of our trained cats. We have quite a few. Some even have quirks." Cassidy smiled. "We can set up an appointment for that right now. And the soonest you could take the cat home is in a week." Midoriya and Inko went home feeling a little better. But neither could really forget the panic attack that occurred. Aizawa stared down at what was in his hand and frowned deeply. This had appeared in his house suddenly. It was one of the famed rose knives with a Roman 3 on the hilt. The last of the 3. Rose must have known he was on the case. Now he had one, which Tsukachi had asked him to keep, just in case. And Tsukachi had gotten his own left on his desk. But where was the third? Rose didn't have it. So, who did they give it to? Some part of Aizawa didn't want to know. The appointment was quickly made. And Midoriya couldn't help but feel excited at the prospect of getting a cat. even if the situation surrounding it wasn't so great. He and Inko had bought everything that would be needed for the cat the day before. So, they were all ready to go. They were asked to meet at an animal training building on the grounds outside of the main area. It was its own place and was a block away from the hospital. They met Cassidy there and she greeted them with a smile and a wave. Midoriya was buzzing with excitement, which was the most of a positive emotion from him during their time together. So, Cassidy counted this as a success. They walked in and after a lot of paperwork they were ready to see the cats and pick one out. They put all the cats in a special room. It was like a lounge, but had things for the cats to play with and food and such. The people picking the animals would go inside and hang out with the cats. The therapist there would then help the person choose the cat best suited towards them. Once they picked, they would sign a few more things, and a few days later the cat could be picked up. Midoriya entered said room and cooed when he saw all the cats there. When he walked in, the cats all perked up and walked over to him, meowing. Midoriya ended up laying on his back on the floor as he was covered by lots of purring cats. "I love cats," came his muffled voice from under the piles of fur. Cassidy and Inko couldn't help but burst into laughter. The cats eventually left him and went about on their own. They did not see or sense any of the concerning signs they were trained to look out for and deemed it fine to go and do their own things. Midoriya watched them carefully, sometimes cooing over their antics. But there was one cat that stood out for him. A smaller black cat with shining green eyes was sunbathing in one of the windows. It was alone and hadn't moved. Even when the pile of cats had come to greet him, this cat had not moved. Just looked at him with, dare he say, intelligent eyes. Midoriya would sometimes feel its gaze on him. But for now, he ignored it, wondering what the cat would do. Instead, he continued to watch and play with the other cats. Cassidy explained some of their quirks. Most of the cats were normal, but some had minor quirks that helped. Like a cat that changed colors depending on the mood of the person touching him. Or the cat that was basically an empath and could tell people's emotions. Or a cat that, when pet, would make someone calm. At some point Inko and Cassidy got distracted, talking about something, and Midoriya took his chance to give the peculiar black cat attention. He walked over to the black cat and sat in front of the window. The cat looked over and into his matching green eyes. They stared at each other for who knows how long. Midoriya saw intelligence in those green eyes. The cat had a calming aura. Both slowly blinked at the same time. Suddenly someone's hand was on his shoulder. He jumped and hissed a bit. The cat did the same exact thing. They both stopped and looked at each other. The cat raised an eyebrow at him. It raised an eyebrow. Sassily. "Yeah, he liked this cat. Is this one available?" He asked Cassidy, who was the one to touch his shoulder. She looked at him in surprise but nodded. "Her name is Artemis. She is a normal cat. I thought you'd pick one of the ones with a quirk, I admit." Cassidy hummed, looking at Artemis in deep thought. "She would be a pretty good fit for you though. One of our most well-trained. Though no one who has visited has considered her yet. I'm glad to see someone likes her." Midoriya had to resist giving Cassidy a deadpan look. Instead, he looked over to Artemis, who gave him an exasperated look. "She always is making those funny expressions." Cassidy chuckled. Midoriya once again had to fight to keep his face blank. "I really like her." Midoriya smiled at the cat. Artemis nodded and purred, getting up to rub against his head. Midoriya giggled and made a raspy purring noise right back. Aizawa had taught he and Shinso how to imitate purring and meowing a long while back. Ends up cats really liked when you purred back. Artemis looked surprised but delighted and continued to purr and rub against him. Cassidy must have seen their bond and decided to approve it. Soon enough the paperwork was done and Midoriya was sadly leaving Artemis until everything was processed and ready. Kota was up once again on a Wednesday night. Now was the time he would meet with Dad. It was Deku. Or Midoriya. Or Izuku. Not Dad. He was looking down at the knife he had managed to hide pretty cleverly. He had ended up hollowing out a book with the knife and making the perfect little hiding spot for it. The knife was very sharp and cut through the paper easily. The book in question was a diary book with a lock that Uncle Tiger had gotten him as a joke. Kota kept the key on a necklace around his neck at all time. The little spare key was hidden in his mother's locket that he kept in a jewelry box that also once belonged to his mom. Every Wednesday night Kota got the knife out at midnight and looked down at it, thinking and missing. He was doing this today when he heard a familiar thump on the balcony outside. His head shot up and he looked out the balcony. A shadowy figure sat on the balcony where he and Deku always would. Kota quickly grabbed the large blanket they always used and quietly ran to the balcony doors. Midoriya turned his head and gave him a large but sad smile. Kota opened the door and ran to him, hugging him tightly. Tears fell from his eyes. "I missed you, Dad," Kota cried. Then he realized what he had just called Midoriya and gasped, flushing red. He expected Midoriya to correct him or laugh. Instead, Midoriya got a teary look in his own eyes and hugged him tighter. "I'll be your dad if you want to, Kota." "I'd be honored," the boy whispered, "though you'll have to make space for a sister," he added a little mischievously. Kota looked up at Midoriya with wonder-filled eyes. Then he blushed further. "That's fine," Kota stammered, looking away. Midoriya let out a little laugh. But it was a bit watery. "Oh, I love you, Kota. And I'm sorry I left for so long." Midoriya apologized. "I know you're Rose," Kota dropped, "but I don't care. You're my hero and you always will be." "But why did you leave? Was it because you were scared of how I would react when I found out?" Midoriya looked at him in surprise, then it melted into sadness and love. He opened his arm and let Kota snuggle under his arm, half hugging him. Midoriya pulled the blanket around them like always. "Yes and no. That was part of it. I wanted to give you time to process it. I also needed time to become a better person. I realized that there is a whole lot wrong with me, more than I want to admit. And I didn't want to hurt you by being around and lashing out or doing something I regretted." Midoriya looked down at him and smiled, "But I've been getting help. And I think I'm ready." Kota nodded seriously. That made some sense. But it was hard to think about how his dad could have so much problems. But he had problems too, he knew. So maybe they could grow together. "I still missed you," Kota said a little petulantly. Midoriya chuckled and ruffled Kota's hair. They sat in silence for a while, just enjoying each other's presence. Eventually Midoriya started gently singing into the night. Kota fell asleep soon after. Artemis had been living in her kitten's house for a while now. She loved her kitten Izuku. And his mother was nice too. But nothing could compare to her kitten. No one could see her intelligence. She understood everything that was said around her by humans. She knew how to do things cats shouldn't. And she tried to show her intelligence. And yet, no one noticed or cared. They treated and babied her like any other cat. Most cats were content with this kind of life. Artemis was not. That was why she wandered to the training center and was taken in and trained as a young cat. She was glad to work at the very least. Then her kitten came along. And her kitten understood. She knew there was more to her quirk than intelligence. When she was a kitten, she found that out the hard way. There was much more than just your average cat. But since one encounter that almost cost her life, she decided not to use it to its full extent around humans. She disliked most humans honestly. They were patronizing. But her kitten was not. Hence why she loves her kitten. She loves her kitten, so she will trust him with her secrets. She knew his secrets, so it was fair he knew hers. Her kitten had nightmares a lot. And those nightmares would often lead to panic attacks. And those panic attacks were oddly silent and scary for even her. But she was always able to pull him back, just as she was trained to. She would gently murmur soft words he could not understand into his ear as she purred and snuggled him. Oftentimes he would talk to her about the things he went through. The time travel, the loss, the pain, the torture. She hopes her kitten would get better soon. He once heard Inko mother and her kitten fighting about medication. She listened in and found that her kitten did not want to take any medicine to help him because of an incident he would never talk about. Inko mother was frustrated in a motherly way. She wanted him to get help, but Izuku kitten was too scared. Artemis could understand his concerns. Especially after one bad argument, he went to his room and locked the door, crying tears of frustration. Then he flopped face down in his bed and screamed into his pillow. Artemis, of course, went and comforted him. She did not approve of Inko mother's behavior. She knew the woman was trying. But she needed to have more patience and understanding instead of pushing. Eventually her kitten told her about the terrible things that had happened to him. And about some very unpleasant pills. She understood now. Artemis decided that when her kitten was calmed down, she would entrust him with her secret. He showed her so much trust, despite knowing full well she had intelligence. Now it was time she earned some of that trust. Eventually he calmed down and she hopped by him, looking deep into his eyes. Izuka Kitten was laying on his side, tears no longer dripping down his face but evident they could start all over again any time now. She looked deep into her kitten's eyes. And she changed. Midoriya looked in shock as Artemis, his small house cat, turned into a huge black panther. Her little body morphed like putty into the shape of the giant animal. But those green eyes were exactly the same, though certainly larger. "What the F, Artemis?" Midoriya whispered. Artemis looked very smug. "You're huge." Midoriya gulped. Artemis purred, loud and raspy, and settled her huge body next to him on the bed. The mattress dipped a bit with her weight. Artemis pulled him towards her with large paws and started using her large tongue to groom him. Midoriya squealed and squirmed as her sandpaper tongue rasped against his hair and face. "Artemis! Stop!" Midoriya giggled, still squirming. His cat might be a giant black panther now, but she was still the same cat inside. Artemis gave a low rumble and ignored his pleas, continuing to groom him. It took a while, but eventually she had got through his now damp hair. Amazingly, it wasn't tangled anymore. He had decided to stop styling it as he normally did and let it grow longer. Now it was a bit longer, going a little past his chin. It wasn't too long and still pretty short, but could get tangled easily. He had lost too many combs to that mess of curls. But it seems Artemis knew her stuff. He looked at her in amazement. "Oh, you actually got through that mess." Midoriya grinned. "Good job." Artemis purred and pulled her kitten close to her to snuggle with. She gently nuzzled him, encouraging him to sleep. As Midoriya's eyes drooped, he decided he could skip out in being a vigilante for a bit. His new plans he was carrying out wasn't time-sensitive anyways. Midoriya's new plan was imperative, but easier. He was going to convert Dabi and Toga. He didn't want them to become villains this time around. Not really at least, though maybe he could enlist their help in other ways. The only time constraint this had was that he had to convert them before Stain got popular. And that was about 7 months away. But it was better to get this started sooner rather than later. And due to him knowing both of their stories, ideals, and likes, he had the advantage. He had been trying to track them down for a while, and he had finally succeeded. Ends up they were roommates, making his job easier. He had always thought he and Toga were pretty close despite their opposing natures. They had a bit of a love-hate relationship often seen between siblings. Dabi was an older brother by default, so he had always acted as the sassy, rebellious older brother figure for League. But in the end, he had lost his mind to power and hatred. But Midoriya had plans to counter that. And plans for Endeavor, of course. Midoriya had to admit, the man was a good friend in his timeline. But at the moment he was still a quirkist, abusive a-hole. And Midoriya wasn't afraid to forcibly knock him down a few pegs. He was sure Dabi would love to help with that. And Toga would be quick to follow if there was a promise of blood. Toga needed to drink human blood, like a vampire, otherwise she would go crazy. But she never got enough blood, even while killing people every once in a while, because she couldn't risk getting caught. That's why she was always ditzy and crazed. Because she was constantly starved. At this point both had murdered a few people. But so had Midoriya, so all was fair. This was why he was currently breaking into a hospital to steal the blood that was about to go stale. They could live without the blood that was about to be of no use to them. Plus, the sheer amount of blood they had was crazy. It made Midoriya angry, thinking of how people who needed to consume blood like Toga were denied blood for absolutely no reason. All this blood was going bad when someone could use them. Such a waste. Now he was jumping through the streets of the red light district with 3 bags of blood hanging from each arm. He made it to the hideout without being seen, luckily. He couldn't help but giggle at the thought of Aizawa's reaction at him having stolen bags of blood hanging from each arm. Midoriya decided to be dramatic and just walked to the front door and knock on it. It was an abandoned apartment building that was still in decent condition. The place had been a popular spot for suicidal teens as well as murders. So, the management decided to just close it after the 30th incident in a month. It was recent, so not at all in bad condition. It was even still connected to heat and electricity. Maybe he had gone a bit overboard in his research. But the more you knew the better. He knocked on the door, hoping he didn't wake them up. It was only 9 p.m., so it should be fine. Especially since the lights were on in at least 2 of the rooms. The door was opened by a familiar person. Midoriya had to suppress a flinch at seeing him. "Dobby, the F do you want?" Dobby growled, a cigarette smoking between his teeth. "I got the good kush," Midoriya said in a deadpan voice, holding up the bags of blood. Dobby looked him up and down in confusion. Then someone squealed and ran to the door. "I smell blood. Good blood," Toga screeched as she went up to the door. Midoriya braced himself for her antics. Sure enough, Toga started bouncing around him. "Oh Dobby, this is pretty fresh. Can I have some, please, please, please?" Toga begged, her tongue lolling out of her mouth a bit. Midoriya could tell she hadn't had blood in a while. "I got this for you, Toga." Midoriya smiled kindly. "I know you need blood or you'll go crazy. Also, here Dobby." Midoriya handed him a large pack of nicotine patches he had in his coat. "Smoking it bad for you, and these should help you do it less often. I'm not one to judge, but I don't think you want lung cancer." Dobby and Toga both paused and looked at him oddly. "How do you know us?" Dobby suddenly snapped. "What do you want?" Toga also narrowed her eyes but didn't say anything. "I want to help you. And in return I want you to help me." Midoriya told them truthfully, "We can discuss a deal further if you will allow me. Either way you get these. I have no use for them." "And your name?" Dobby asked, still suspicious. "Polaroid for now. But maybe later I'll tell you my real name." "I think we can trust him, Dobby," Toga said, surprisingly serious. "He doesn't look like he's lying." Dobby sighed, unhappy that she was right. But he opened the door further. "Fine. Come inside." He relented. Midoriya gave him a smile and a thumbs up. They settled on the couch, and Toga started sipping from the blood bags with a sharpened metal straw. Smart. That way she didn't make too much of a mess. "So, what is this deal, Polaroid?" Dobby asked formally, still suspicious. "I have a quirk, or it was possibly a quirk used on me, I have no idea, but it caused me to know more than I should. About the future." Midoriya calmly explained, "All business. You and Toga here play a huge part in the future. And the inevitable fall of the world or gain of it. I saw you two becoming full-on villains and killing many people. Including some of my best friends." Dobby's eyes flashed when he saw the slight bitterness in Midoriya's eyes. But he did not move, neither did Midoriya. Toga stopped drinking her blood to pay attention. "But, after you two perished, I learned a lot more about you. And I know that what you did was because of how you got hurt." Midoriya looked to Toga. "Toga, you deserve so much better. It was despicable that you were called a villain for a quirk you were simply born with. And to be denied blood despite there being plenty of it was cruel and awful." He turned to Dobby. "Dobby, or Tuya Todoroki, your father is an abusive a-hole who needs to be taken down more than a few pegs." At this point both Dobby and Toga were staring at him with their jaws dropped. "In the future you become villains. And the world is forever changed by that choice. And honestly, I don't blame you for becoming a villain to try and incite a change. But let me tell you." Midoriya took off his tinted glasses so they could fully see the seriousness in his green eyes. "You changed nothing. You died and the world became a worse place. People with so-called villainous quirks and mutant quirks and the quirklessness were judged and hurt even more due to the distrust deeply embedded in everything. Becoming a villain killed you and brought down the rest of Japan with you." Midoriya leaned forward and looked at them, a threatening aura emanating off him. "I watched as you killed the people I loved in that lost timeline. And I am willing to forget all that and be allies, if not friends. But if you become villains, there is nothing that will stop me from ending both of you." They stared each other down. Then Midoriya straightened and put his glasses back on. "You have two choices. 1. You reject me and I will never bother you again and you will never bother me again. 2. You help me and we become allies. We can discuss the benefits of that if you choose that option. Midoriya got up from the couch, leaving the rest of the blood bags for Toga. He held out a hand to shake. Pick your poison, Midoriya said coolly. Dabi and Toga looked to each other, having a silent conversation. Then Toga nodded and Dabi took his hand, shaking it. You have a deal, he said solemnly. Midoriya went from serious to happy in the blink of an eye. Thank you so much. Oh my gosh, you have no idea how scary that was. Midoriya laughed. I was worried you'd say no, then that would put a big K&K in my plans. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Dabi raised an eyebrow and Toga giggled, going back to sipper her blood. Toga, those will go stale in a week. Drink them while you can. I'll try to get you at least 1 or 2 bags a week. And Dabi, if you like the patches, I can easily get you more. Where did you even get the blood Polaroid? Dabi asked out of pure curiosity. Oh, I stole it from a hospital on the way here. They were the closest to being unusable and they have plenty. Not to mention it's all type A so it's not hard to get or anything. Midoriya shrugged. Oh, I'm technically a vigilante by the way. And since we will be working together and I know all about you, I think it's fair you get to know me a bit. Midoriya grinned and pulled off the glasses and mask. Dabi choked on air when he saw that he had been talking to a teen, not a short adult. Midoriya gave a cheeky bow. Midoriya Izuku at your service. I'm technically 14 though mentally, I'm 24 due to extenuating circumstances. You might also want to know that I am the serial killer Rose. Though I'm done with that job. Dabi and Toga looked at him. Then Dabi groaned and pinched his nose. So you're saying you are a teenager not teenager who is not only a vigilante and a serial killer. Great. I'm also applying for UA in a few months. Midoriya also helpfully added. Dabi raised his arms in exasperation. Great. There's more. You are a vigilante, villain, and are likely going to be a hero. Ugh, I feel like I just made a deal with the devil. I can assure you I am not the devil. Though I am a little all-knowing. Midoriya snickered. You know what? Whatever. I'm not going to question it. Now, you're here to talk business. What do you want us to do? Let's just get this over with. Dabi sighed. Midoriya nodded, serious again. He crashed back down on the couch. Well, you have a choice what you do and do not do. As some of it is dangerous and life-threatening. And I don't want to force you to do anything you don't want to. Midoriya's eyes went dark. I know how terrible it is to be forced into something you don't want to do. Dabi and Toga shivered a bit at the darkness in his eyes and voice. Then he went right back to being bright as if nothing happened. It was chilling. Anyways, for the most part one just want you to not be villains and help me gather information and have my back. But I would rally like you two to become vigilantes and then later join a villain organization undercover. But both of those are obviously dangerous, so it's your call. I can provide costumes and disguises if needed, of course. Dabi and Toga looked at him, then nodded. We can do that. It actually sounds pretty fun. I've been wanting to let off some steam. Dabi grinned. Ooh, I can steal some pretty blood. Toga cooed, daydreaming of the yummy blood. Midoriya chuckled. Just one rule, try not to kill anyone or seriously injure it. Underground heroes and the police are more likely to let you hang around as long as you are helpful. Do not cause a lot of damage in your fights, and never kill or seriously injure anyone. I basically work with the heroes and police now. I know they are secretly trying to find my identity, but they won't be knowing anything until I let them. Midoriya explained. Toga looked a little sad but nodded. Dabi also agreed. Good. Now, I have to be getting home. My cat will get angry if I don't. She is very tight about my schedules. Midoriya sighed, getting up and putting his mask and glasses back on. Dabi deadpanned. Midoriya nodded solemnly. She has an intelligence quirk, likely a lifespan extending one, and can turn into a full-sized Black Panther. Midoriya told them, not to mention she is a trained support animal. So she's stricter than my own mother. Support animal? Toga questioned with a tilt of her head. Midoriya looked at them with cold, sad eyes as he went to walk out. One does not watch as every single person they ever loved die and come out of it unscathed. He walked out. School started up after the break and things were going suspiciously well for Midoriya. It was the start of his third year and he was going to be meeting All Might again soon. That's going to be strange, considering he had been there when he had been shot in the head. Awkward. For him at least. In 3 days' time would be the day the sludge incident was supposed to occur. Midoriya had to make a plan to prove his worth to All Might without putting Bakugo in danger and getting any attention from the media like last time. This was going to be a pain in the butt, wasn't it? Midoriya went through the whole song and dance with that terrible day from so long ago. He remembered every bit of it despite it being so long ago. The human memory really does work in funny ways. Midoriya sighed as he heard his teacher call him out for wanting to go to UA. Yes, everyone, including the teachers, had been staying away from him in fear of both him and Bakugo. But that still didn't stop them from doing things to him in more subtle ways that made things hard for him to tell who did what or just made his things inconvenient. For example, people had taken to leaving spider lilies on his desk, tacks in his shoes, and writing insults on his desk. He had no idea who was doing it, so there was no one to target. They were too cowardly to say things to his face, so they got more creative. That was fine. He'd been through worse. He just wished for their sakes that they were better people. Of course, everyone but Bakugo laughed at him. It seemed that this class was much more crass than the other class. Midoriya, his teacher sked, a mock look of pity on his face. I am disappointed that you would be so unrealistic. It's time you got your head out of the clouds and faced the harsh reality of life. This was new. This hadn't happened last time. Midoriya gave the class a sardonic grin, curling his hands under his chin and resting it on them. A dark, manic light glinted in his eyes. Oh, he purred, and everyone shivered, even Bakugo. Realistic, you say? Realistically, what else is there for me to do? Kill myself? Because that's about it. No sane company will hire a quirkless thing anyways. But as a hero I can have my own agency, or just work underground where I would not be on the rankings. No one would even know I exist, much less that I'm quirkless. Midoriya's smile became wider and his eyes narrower as he tilted his head to the side. Truly looking deranged now. Or I could just become a villain. He chuckled. It wouldn't be that hard. Because no one would ever blame the quirkless. I would be overlooked in every aspect, because I couldn't possibly be strong enough to kill someone. It might be fun. I could have a good time before I decide to go to hell. I'm going to hell in the end, so I might as well go down a legend. The first quirkless villain. So, which one would you rather have? A quirkless hero willing to change the world for the better? Midoriya leaned forward, the threatening aura from him tripling. Or would you rather have a quirkless villain with knowledge that could topple society as a whole? Who knows? I think I would find great delight in watching this world burn to the ground. Midoriya giggled, too childish and innocent to be nothing but chilling in this situation. Or maybe I should just kill myself? He grinned and stood up from his seat. He lifted his bangs and showed the round scar on his forehead. Not that I haven't tried it already. They all paled. But Bakugo looked the worst of them all. He hadn't known that Midoriya had. Midoriya let his bangs fall again. Then he picked up his bag, the bell ringing just in time. Hey Teach, I think I'm not going to come back here. I'm done with the utter bullshit here. I'll test out. I've already learned the whole circular for this year. So don't expect to see me again. Midoriya grinned sardonically as he walked out of the classroom. Everyone was pale and silent in their seats. Midoriya grumbled to himself as he walked out of school early. He really should have just tested out last year. He could use the time during the day to further his plans. Midoriya went over his current plans for the day in his mind. He had already told Bakugo to head directly home after school, making sure he avoided where the sludge villain would be. So that was out of the way. He knew where the sludge villain would start and tracked all possible routes he could take via the sewer system. So no matter where he popped up, Midoriya was ready. And he had a plan to see All Might's true form without nearly dying. The whole impressing All Might thing without media attention was going to be hard. And he likely will have to be frank with the man about his wish to go underground. He didn't want to mislead the man. He could do this all without One for All. He could change the future without it. But it would work out so much better if he did get it. And even if he decides that he doesn't want to be hero after all this, he won't have to bother finding a successor. In the last timeline, he had been told by the vestiges that he had to be the last user. He could not pass it on. Because at this point, if the quirk got passed on, it would be too powerful for a body to handle. Not to mention it cut someone's lifespan in half if they had a quirk. And good quirkless people were near impossible to find in Japan, much less the world. Maybe it was for the best that all for one and one for all end. Well, it would be for the best. It really would. Midoriya came out of his regalia and saw a familiar tunnel in front of him. Midoriya was early, so he had time to get his equipment out of his backpack. That equipment being an actually safe container for the sludge man that wasn't a soda bottle, 3 dull throwing knives, and a taser he had tweaked with to make more powerful. Then Midoriya made himself look normal, all while hiding the materials in the large coat he still liked to wear during the day. Ends up that it would take a long while for his temperature to go back to normal. But his doctor predicted that everything would be in working order temperature-wise in a year. Though apparently his heart rate situation would be permanent. That was a double-edged sword. It made serious injuries a bit more dangerous, but it also made him bleed slower. So, double-edged sword. Midoriya heard the sludge villain before he saw him. Midoriya whirled around just in time, throwing 2 knives from his sleeves. The dulled blades hurt the eyes, but didn't pop them luckily. The villain recoiled with a whole lot of cuss words. Midoriya took this moment to walk up to the villain and casually tase him. The villain started screaming, then melted into a puddle. Midoriya smirked and started scooping the main villain part into the case he had. I am here, All Might announced. Midoriya froze and looked at All Might. One of the villain's floating eyeballs was still in his hand, as well as a bit of foul-smelling sludge. Oh, hi All Might. Midoriya smiled calmly. You were after this villain, right? Well, he was trying to possess me. So I saved myself. Midoriya put the villain into the container and shut it with a slight hiss. All Might looked a little confused. And how did you do that, my boy? He asked. Oh, how Midoriya wanted to cry hearing that endearing term, despite it being sad casually at the moment. I had these 2 dulled throwing knives for my training. And then I have my taser that my mom got me just in case. Ends up the villain absorbs a lot. He had just gone through the sewers, so he soaked up a lot of water. Which when electrocuted, it very strong. So, he's out for a bit. Midoriya got up and stretched his back, happy with the pops he got from it. He walked over to All Might and handed him the container of sludge. The passcode for that is 1134. Midoriya told him as the man took it. It's not airtight so the villain won't suffocate, but it also will not let him out. Just make sure not to Detroit smash it into any walls and you should be fine. It's pretty sturdy. All Might nodded, humming a bit as he studied the container. This is quite the nifty thing. Well, thank you my boy. You were quite heroic today. All Might gave him his signature thumbs up and went to hop away. Wait. Midoriya suddenly called, getting an idea last minute. All Might stopped and turned to him in confusion. Some desperation lying right under his normal facade. What is it, my boy? I really must get going. All Might asked. That container was really expensive and it's all I had that was safe. Can I give you my number so you can have me pick it up? Midoriya asked, sounding a little desperate. It was sort of true, that container was not cheap. All Might shrugged. Midoriya smiled at him and quickly took a mini notebook from his coat pocket. He always kept one on him just in case he wanted to do some analysis and didn't have his bigger notebook. That and a pen. He quickly jotted the number down and handed it to the hero. All Might took it and made sure it was safe in his pocket. Then he geared to launch and Midoriya did not stop him. Goodbye, young man. He called as he launched off. Midoriya smiled. Success. 3 days had passed since the sludge incident and he was still waiting for a call or text. If All Might didn't send something soon, he was going to hack his systems and break into his office to leave an ominous message. Even Artemis could tell that he was stressed. He was studying for his test that would let him skip his last year of middle school. He was busy helping Toga and Dabi officially start their vigilante careers. He was still in a rough spot with his mother and Cassidy about not taking medication. The Bakugus were busy with work and training respectively. He had to plan for future operations he would be conducting soon. He had to make sure no accidental leads were found on the Rose and Polaroid case individually. And he was still waiting for that DMED phone call. Midoriya decided to get out of his room before he stressed himself out further. That was a mistake because his mother had gotten home early. He loved his mom, yes, but she could be suffocating about certain things. She was better than she used to be. At least now she didn't baby him or try to convince him to stop trying for his dreams. Now she at least saw how capable he was. But she was still going on about that stupid medication. He had already told her and Cassidy he was not going to take it. And that was final. There were other ways to fight depression and whatever else he had without pills. Melatonin gummies for sleep. Certain teas to help with stress, anxiety, and even depression. Artemis as a whole. Meditation. Exercise. Sunlight. Being productive. Good eating habit. And on and on. He was already doing all these things, and while sure, medication could work faster, it was better for him this way. He didn't like taking unneeded medication, and in his mind that medication was unneeded. Call him stubborn or whatever. Ugh, he didn't remember being this moody as a teenager. Anyways, he went downstairs and saw his mother and was about go back upstairs when she spotted him. Izuku, could you come here for a moment? We need to talk. Inko said seriously. Midoriya knew what was coming and groaned, burying his face in his hands. Don't give me that attitude, young man. Inko huffed as most mother would in that situation. Artemis must have heard what was going on and ran down the stairs to join him. Midoriya walked over to the couch and sat in it with a huff. When Artemis jumped next to him and crawled into his arms, he gently hugged her and buried his face into her soft fur. Inko sat in the chair across from the couch and sighed. Izuku, please. I see you getting more and more stressed every day, and I can see that it is taking a toll on both your mind and my mind. You really need to take dash. Please, stop. Midoriya whimpered, already crying. Artemis meowed sadly and started purring, sending little glares towards Inko for making her kitten cry. Izuku baby. It's you who needs to stop. Inko said firmly, you are the one who needs to stop being stubborn and do what's best for yourself. It might be scary, but it will help you. That's what they always say, that's what they said before they, Midoriya choked. Artemis hissed at Inko, then went back to comforting Midoriya. But Inko was just as stubborn as Midoriya in some rights. She was not letting this go. Izuku, I'm going to send you to a psych ward there if you don't decide to take medication. Inko told him firmly. Midoriya let out a broken, scared wail and buried his face deeper into Artemis's fur. Inko flinched but remained hardened. Artemis stopped comforting Midoriya to continuously hiss at Inko. It's for your best, Izuku. Inko said, taking a deep breath, you have until after your test to decide. That was a week and a half away. Inko took another deep breath and got up, going to the door and grabbing her purse. I'll leave the house to you for the night. Inko told him, me and Mitsuki are going to stay the night at a hotel and have a girls' night. It'll give you time to think and be alone. She left. Midoriya continued sobbing and wailing, curled into a little ball on the couch. The second Artemis heard Inko mother's car pull out of the condo complex, she turned into a panther and gently dragged her kitten to the floor and started purring and grooming him. She noticed immediately that he was having a panic attack and upped her comforting. It took a long time for her kitten to calm down. But he was still crying. Artemis huffed. She was absolutely set at Inko mother. That woman was being very unfair. She didn't know about Izuku kitten's trauma because he was too scared to say anything about it to her. It was just one of the symptoms of his PTSD. Sure, the medication would be helpful. But a big part of overcoming depression was implementing healthy lifestyles. She had heard the doctors saying that all the time. And she knew her kitten was trying his best to do that. And she made sure to help him with that. Getting him up at good times, making sure he slept the best he could, pestering him to get food and water, all those things. And with her he was doing much better than before, she could tell he was. She was glad she could help her kitten be better. She was never going to leave him. Not if she had a say in it at least. She saw her kitten was faring better, but knew he wouldn't have the strength to move to a better place. He was already half-lidded, tears still streaming down his face. Artemis was glad for her large and strong body in that moment. She gently grabbed the scruff of her kitten's shirt and pulled him up, swiveling him to hang from her back. He sniffled and hiccuped, holding her close. She purred as she carried her kitten up the stairs and to his room, setting him on his bed. Her kitten curled into a small ball again. Artemis's heart ached. Oh, her poor Izuku kitten. She decided he could use his melatonin gummies to aid his sleep as well as some water. So she of course went to the bathroom and used the use of her large mouth to grab a sealed water bottle and the gummies from there. She dropped these things on the bed and gently nudged her kitten. He whimpered, but she kept going. Eventually he uncurled to look at her tiredly. She rolled the gummy bottle and water to him. Thanks, Artemis. He sniffled between hiccups. She was only satisfied once he had taken 2 gummies and had drunk at least half the water in the bottle. She curled around her kitten and purred him to sleep. Once he was deeply slumbering, she resolved herself to watch over him. Her kitten had no dreams that night. Midoriya spent the next 7 days were spent avoiding his mother and holing up in his room to study. He was very stressed and unhappy. He had no idea what to do. He was stuck between 2 very scary options for him. On one hand he could SCK it up and take a whole bunch of medication he was scared to get, especially from that specific place. And then his mother wouldn't send him to that awful, awful place. Or on the other hand he could avoid taking the medication and be sent to the psych ward and likely forced to take the medication. He knew which one he had to take. But what if he took neither? His mother had been acting weirdly towards him, always looking at him with pity or like he would snap any second. And honestly, he might if this keeps going on. But there was a third option, his own option. But it was risky, and might put a bit of a K&K in his plans. But might make them easier. It was a 50-50 chance. Midoriya was deeply considering this option on the 7th day of avoidance and stress when his phone pinged. He looked down at his phone, expecting a text from Bakugo, Dabi, or Toga. But it was from an unknown number. All Might. Midoriya quickly fumbled to open his phone and read the message. Unknown number, this is All Might's secretary Toshinori Yagi. Unknown number, if you could meet me at this location to pick up your container that would be very helpful. Unknown number sent location. Midoriya gasped and quickly thumbed a reply. I thought he had forgotten for a second. Time. Unknown number, what time will work for you, my boy? Midoriya giggled. All Might was not even close to subtle. At least not to him. Me? Are you available in an hour? Midoriya had an English song playing through his headphones he normally used on patrol pulled over his ears. He was walking to the very familiar location of Dagoba Beach. All Might had agreed to meet in an hour and so here he was. He had decided to bring Artemis along as he didn't want to be alone. At the moment she was small, hanging around his neck like a makeshift black scarf. Though resolute you may pretend to be inside your walls. The people soon will realize that your feeble body can't forestall the inevitable end that we all will one day meet. You are human, you are dying, yes I know it's bittersweet. But you knew this day would come, and you can't borrow, steal, or cheat. Yes, your maker gave you time, but you've run out, and soon you'll meet. Midoriya sang in perfect, practiced English as he walked into the trash-filled beach. All Might heard the boy he was seeking singing clearly. The English lyrics made him shiver. The boy didn't even know just how accurate those words were. Midoriya stopped singing when he saw All Might, or Toshinori Yagi since he was in his small form. He waved. Hello Yagi-san. He called with a smile, turning off his music with his phone. What was that song, my boy? All Might asked. It is impressive that you are fluent in English and I happen to be as well. Midoriya blinked. Then he realized just how oddly true the words were. Oh, it's called The Court Jester. Midoriya told him. I thought it was catchy. All Might nodded. I can see why. It is quite catchy. The man chuckled. He held out the tube he had been holding. Here is your container. All Might said, giving Midoriya the container. Midoriya nodded and Artemis meowed at him. All Might jumped, having thought the cat was an odd scarf or hood. He coughed out blood. Goodness. I thought that cat was a scarf. All Might spluttered. Midoriya laughed and casually handed him a tissue. He had anticipated some blood spewing. All Might spluttered a thanks and took the tissue. Sorry about that. This is Artemis. She is my support cat and friend. She has an intelligence quirk, though for some reason most people can't tell. Artemis meowed again, giving him the stink eye. He giggled and pet her. All Might watched all this with amusement and confusion. An animal with a quirk, huh? That's not very common. Though do you mind if I ask why you require a support animal? All Might politely asked. Midoriya cringed but nodded. I have bad PTSD, anxiety, depression, and acute stress disorder. She helps me out of the occasional panic attack or nightmare. But most of all, she is a friend. And Lord knows I need more of those. Midoriya sighed sadly, scratching her head as Artemis calmly purred. All Might frowned. What had this kid gone through to warrant such terrible things? It was rude to ask, so he kept his mouth shut. It wasn't his business anyways. I hope that you get better, my boy. All Might smiled reassuringly. Just know that despite your mental troubles you are still strong. I know many a hero who struggles but is still a great hero. So, you can do it? Tears sprang to his eyes. Thank you, sir. Midoriya sniffled, wiping his eyes and nose with his sleeve. I really need to hear that. And nobody has told me that long tea time. All Might smiled and gently ruffled his hair. I said it because it was true, kid. All Might grinned. You seem like a good kid. Just keep trying and you'll get through it. Midoriya couldn't take it anymore and shot forward to hug the man, careful of his side. Thank you, he sobbed. The man was surprised but laughed nonetheless, patting the boy's head. And giving Artemis a quick pet as well. Maybe I'll keep contact with this kid. He seems like a kind, strong, determined, and quirky kid. All Might thought to himself as he comforted the crying boy.